Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We are looking at James White's book, The King James Only Controversy. And so this video is entitled The King James Only Controversy, Examining the Claims of James White by Nick Sayers, Part 5. And so we're looking at the claims of James White. James White has put his leg in the door and said, well, my book is the go-to book for people who are confused about why there's so many Bibles. And he asks this rhetorical question, can we trust the modern translations? And so he's arguing in the affirmative that we can trust the modern translations. But what's interesting is he's not really interested in exposing the heretical people who are involved with the Bible industrial complex. And so you'll hear him say a lot about, people who follow the King James text. And he also just throws, Textus Receptus people in there. He throws majority text people in there. He throws just users of the King James text in there as well. And of course, in every type of movement, in pre-trib research, in just trying to think of anything else. Young Earth creationism, there's always a weirdo here and there. And so usually what he does is he focuses on the weirdos and then he just taints us all with the same brush. And so we get pigeonholed, we get labeled a King James onlyist, which most people, if I said I'm a King James onlyist, they would just think I was what we would claim as a hyper King James onlyist, someone who's believes that the King James floated down from heaven and all this sort of weird stuff, or a double inspiration. But what he does, he defines everything so broadly that you can't really put anything into its correct category. He just labels a whole bunch of different people as King James onlyists. He even says that his categorizations are broad and people will get upset about them. But I guess that's because he's probably said that type of thing to people and they've gone, no, that doesn't fit my position. But James White, he considers himself a bit of a hero when he comes to debates. And so when it comes to debates, he's often saying you must represent your opponent properly. And, don't engage in ad hominem attacks. Don't create straw man argumentation, learn their position and then, attack that position, sort of thing. But he doesn't seem to really have a good grasp on the position of many KJV people, Textus Receptus people. I mean, labeling people who follow the majority text as King James only is one of the most silly things that I've ever seen in this whole debate. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre doing that. And just people who use the King James, well, they're now akin to, someone who believes that the King James floated down from heaven or that it was a secondary inspiration. So we can see that James White, from the very outset of this book, has made a bunch of category errors, which is one of his favorite terms to throw around. What I'm realizing is James White, he's always pointing, but he's got the three fingers pointing back at him. He doesn't make good categories for different types of King James onlyists. I mean, to say Textus Receptus people are King James onlyists is, it's just an error. There are Textus Receptus people out there who they despise the King James. They don't like it at all. And so how can you label them as that? And people who come against me, they say, why do you follow the King James? But they're TR people. And they attack me and they slander me and they say also, and I'm there thinking, how can these people be in a King James category? How can they, following the TR, be thrown into a English King James category, King James only? obviously, even just that in itself shows you how broad his interpretation of King James onlyism is. It's just error. It's just pure and simple. It's just error. And James White, he needs to come up with better categories. Now, I know the Textual Confidence Collective tried to rectify this by calling themselves the Textual Confidence Collective, but by calling us Textual Absolutists. So it was sort of a strange term because, you look up absolutist and it's never really favorable. It's not like, you get nice people being absolutists, And so we're going to look at some things. Now, we've got a few people in the house observing God's green earth. Says, I sure do love my KJB. Docky says, good morning, evening, Nick, observing GGE. Good morning, Nick, the Straight Gateway. Good morning, all, from observing God's green earth. And hi to everyone. So everyone's just living the dream. The textual Sith Lords. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you a clip that, well, before I show you this clip, I just want to show you what's coming up. So we've got quite a few things coming up. So we have in 11 days. So this is a live Q&A. I'm just going to turn the internet off on my phone so we can run a little bit faster. That's better. Live Q&A featuring Mike Ferrando, Nick Sayers, and Mike Holner. So this is not on this channel. So this is in the YouTube page of Write the Vision Ministry. So this is Mike Holner. So if you just typed in like Mike Holner, you would probably get there. But what I'll do, just in case, just throw this into the mix, or bookmark that one, or go there and like it or notify me, because this is going to be awesome. So these two guys, they know a lot about the Comma-Johanneum, and so they've invited me on. I'm jumping in the mix there, and I'm going to be talking about the comma as well. And what we want is live interaction. So we want people to come on board and say, well, what about Erasmus? What about, this and that? What about Scrivener? What about, the Westcott and Hall? Why did they take the comma out? What about this and that? So we want to answer your questions as best we possibly can. And so I think with all three of us there, we'll be able to, take turns in answering these questions, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be great. And we want to promote confidence in 1 John 5:7 because it is very defensible. And if this is the most undefensible thing that people point out, like James White and Dan Wallace, then, well, we defend it so strongly that it just goes to show you that their argumentation is not strong. Because usually on this issue, they actually all become majority text people because they know they really don't have any other argument against it. And so I'll just read this blurb here. It says, Mike Ferrando, Nick Sayers, and Mike Holner are producing 100% audience Q&A session with all related questions to be answered live. You don't want to miss this episode. We'll be answering all questions from the Textus Receptus to eschatology, from the King James Bible to the modern critical texts, from 1 John 5:7 to Revelation 16:5, from the Old Latin to the Church Fathers. You name it, and we'll answer it. So this is the chance of people to put us on the spot, and we'll be dumbfounded and just sitting there going, well, I guess you critical text guys win. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to provide a sufficient answer for all these questions. And so this episode is 100% dedicated for the audience, of which have many questions, and we will do our best to satisfy your each quest in the search for truth. So I know that oftentimes when that's put out there, sometimes there is a people will throw out all sorts of things, and I've gone down rabbit holes after debates where it's like, the stones of some animal or whatever, and it's like Leviathan stones, and it's like, is that his reproductive organs or whatever? And so you're going down these rabbit holes. But people have all sorts of questions. People have all sorts of doubts that they think the King James Bible cannot be trusted, and I doubt there's anything that will be tripping up over. But it is quite amazing how little people can bring up about the King James. Like Thomas Ross brought up with James White in his debate against Thomas Ross. James White brought up Acts chapter 5, verse 30, which said, whom they killed and hanged on a tree, or whom they slew and hanged on a tree. And said, well, see, it's in a chronological order. So they killed Jesus and then they put him on a tree in the King James. Well, the other Bibles don't say that. It says whom they killed by hanging him on a tree, so they've just got to accurately translate this. But it's just silly because it talks about God raised Jesus from the dead. And so did that happen first? Is it in the chronological order that Jesus rose from the dead and then he died and then they put him on a tree? It's like James White's just making this up. And I don't think anyone's ever really stumbled over that and gone, oh, that's the wrong order. And it's exactly how it should be. It's how it should be translated. And so we've got quite a few people jumping in and joining the show. And so Derek says, good morning, Nick. Good morning, everyone. Hope all is well. All is well. So, yeah, join us in 11 days, 7th of July. So that's 9 my time in Australia. So ignore that. Click on the link and you'll find out where it is or what time it is where you are. So, and I got another announcement. So we have this debate coming up. Has God preserved the Greek New Testament in a single printed edition? And so we have TurretinFan debating Peter Van Cleek. So this is going to be on Saturday, July 13th at 5 p.m. So that's Eastern Standard Time, New York City time. I've just realized that because I'm in Australia, it is really hard to communicate to people in all different states with different time zones and daylight savings and all this stuff. So I'm just like, well, New York City time, we'll just keep it like that. So so this is in 18 days, and so it's in less than 3 weeks. So we've got this one coming up in under 2 weeks, and then this one in under 3 weeks. So we've got to be coming up. What else have we got going? So we, TurretinFan and myself, looking at doing a Revelation 16:5 debate sometime soon. And James Snap Jr. and myself are going to be doing a Textus Receptus debate. So I know he is debating Will Kinney on Standing for Truth debate channel. And so after that, sometime after that, we are going to organize a debate between ourselves, James Snap and myself, and it's going to be on this channel. So stay tuned for that. So that's what's happening. But I want to talk about what James, so I'll keep those open because I'll probably show that towards the end. But I want to show you what James White said about me today. So we'll just get into this. It's quite funny. But James White, he doesn't really want to interact with things that I'm saying or point people in my direction, but he found a meme that I made, and so he wants to talk about it. So this is fresh off the press. So this is James White today. I'll just unmute him. Okay, here we go.
Speaking of which, real quick, I'm going to go to a Bart Ehrman thing here. But I saved a graphic. And I don't know where this graphic came from. There are some graphics, the chick and the cat, I mean, how many thousands of variants of the chick and the cat meme have you seen? I mean, I have really lost track. Some of them are really good. Most of them are mediocre. Some of them are really bad. But there's this one meme where you've got the guy going like this, and then the next down below he's going, and then you'll put two things. So they've stuck it's really badly done, really cheapy, but
he wants better memes. It's like, what do you expect us to do? Like, take a lot of time. I mean, people got it. So I've got, expose some, because this is what he did. Expose some weird King James Version only numerology. And as usual, make out all KJV TR people are prone to this. So this is what he said on his dividing line, that King James people are prone to this type of, the weird numerology of, Luke 1942 is relevant to 1942. It's, this type of thing. Oh, it's about the Jews and it's about them getting punished and all this sort of stuff, which is just weird. And I knew a guy locally here, and he used to be writing to that. It was, John 6:66 was when all the disciples left Jesus. All these other disciples left Jesus. When you're looking at math, because he was saying, 5's the number of man, and 6 is the number of the devil, and 7's the number of God. And so he was basically saying all the chapters that have the number 6, you have to read them like it's everything in there is evil. I'm like, what about the Lord's Prayer? And he's like, yep, it's all wrong. Look, the Catholics use it. And I'm like, it was just really nutty. But he, I wouldn't have even considered him like a King James guy, but he used the King James because most people just do by default, So I've heard of all sorts of weird numerology rubbish over the years. But then James White turns around and offers, in its place, some weird, contradictory textual science, CBGM art voodoo stuff. And so I actually thought this meme was great, and I was laughing myself. I thought about making this, and I thought, actually, that'll be good. And so when I was making it, I sort of laughed about it, saying that it's a textual science, but it's CBGM art voodoo stuff, So anyway, this is what James White is talking about.
What do you expect? This is the Textus Receptus guy, Nick Sayers, I think is his name. So the top one with the is expose some weird KJVO numerology, and as usual, make out all KJV/TR people are prone to this. And so this was after we did the thing. I played some of the video of the guy that was using that one app, where you can what number this particular use of Lord is how many out of all the uses of Lord in this particular verse, and this verse is what verse amongst all the verses in this book. And this is how you do all sorts of numerology, wacko craziness type stuff. So I had pointed out the silliness of all this stuff. So this came out, I think, the next day or the day after, something like that. So you've got expose some weird KJVO numerology. And then down below that, it says, but then offer in its place some weird contradictory textual science /CBGM/art/voodoo stuff. So well, here, I should have, I'm sorry. I
thought it was a classic, even though it's my own joke. Like I couldn't stop laughing at it, and that's why I really had to make it.
You've got the thing connected over there. I just need to put this down and do that. Yeah, so there it is. There it is. So you see that meme, you see that thing all the time, and like I said, they stuck my face on it, and it's pretty bad. But then offer in its place some weird contradictory textual science CBGM/art/voodoo stuff. So I'm like, okay, voodoo stuff. That's coming from somebody I'm pretty certain hasn't actually done any reading on what CBGM is, because fundamentally what CBGM is based upon the largest, most exhaustive collation of the largest number of manuscripts that have been done. And it's allowing the computer to be able to compare massive data sets that the human mind can't do.
Yeah, okay, that sounds fantastic. But when you've got like Dead Sea Scrolls by the Museum of the Bible, that were chemically tested in 2020, and they were all proven fake to be forgeries, modern day forgeries. When you've got archaic Mark, that was a 13th century Byzantine manuscript that was supposed to be a representation of Vaticanus, because they were all excited. It's like, how did this Byzantine text have Vaticanus readings? But they chemically tested it in 2013, I think it was, and it came up with Prussian blue ink in it, which is modern day ink. And then they also found the printed document that this forgery was copied from. It had all the same like endings and everything like in this document. And so there are forgeries. There are, we're waiting for Vaticanus and Sinaiticus to be chemically tested, because people are taking it by faith that these are old and that they have weight. Because at the moment, if you believe that Sinaiticus is a forgery, well, you are taking that pretty much by faith. There's only a few people who've really examined Sinaiticus. Like I've collated the introduction to Sirach, and I did that with Sinaiticus and looking at a few other manuscripts. And it was interesting that it did seem to follow the 1821 Moscow Bible, which is a Greek edition. So that was quite interesting. It seemed to have some of the same errors, or not the same errors, but it seemed to skip. It looked like homoioteuton at certain points where there were breaks in the lines or similar endings, homoioteuton, this type of thing. And so, but anyway, I've looked into that. A few other people have done that sort of collation work as well. And there's very few people who really can look at that stuff and go, well, this is fake or this is not or whatever. So most people are just taking it by faith. So if you're usually in the King James camp, people are like, well, I think it's a forgery. If you're not, you're going, well, I think it's old. Well, why don't you just get it chemically tested? And then you can know. It can put that argument to rest. But the thing is, it just doesn't seem to be something they want to do, because look at the Museum of the Bible. When they did that, it's like, oh, they're modern day forgeries. What are we going to do now? They've already dethroned the Textus Receptus, apparently. And so this, academy with, Westcott and Hort working with Unitarians like George Van Smith, they created a never seen before sham wow, brand new, amazing Greek text that was based upon the principles that they had to reject all the Byzantine readings because that was a horrible, vile text. The Textus Receptus was vile, and they wanted to get back to the earliest text. So they said Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are representatives of that text. So they mashed these together like mashed potato. They squished them together, and they created the never seen before new text of Westcott and Hort. So Unitarians like George Van Smith, who worked on the text, he was very happy because he wrote a book talking about the doctrinal changes that have occurred because of the changes that occurred in Westcott and Hort's revision. So they call this a revision of the King James, which is so strange. It's just nothing like the King James. But they were commissioned to do a revision of the King James, but they snuck in this never seen before text. And even Art Farstead said that in the Ankerberg show with James White in the same room. They snuck in this Greek text that has 2,900 less words and 8,000 changes. So obviously, it's not something you really we're really happy about. But then they found a bunch of papyri with old Byzantine readings in it, and it's like, well, where did these readings come from? But they've already dethroned the Textus Receptus, so don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. And especially when the Bible industrial complex was just starting to rev up, and they're like, hang on, we can make money off this. Ka-ching, we can cash in on this. It's a bit like the Nostradamus stuff, you know, the Da Vinci Code stuff, you know, some religious scandal that always, you know, people are interested in it. And so people, after a while, you know, the Nestle, he picked up on the Westcott and Hort text, the Tischendorf text, the Weiss text, and also the Weymouth. And so he had created his Nestle text, Everhard Nestle. And then it went through his son, and then Kurt Aland, he picked up that mantle. So it became called the Nestle Alarm text. And so after a while, he was working with Bruce Metzger, Carlo Martini, who was in line to be he was a Jesuit in line to be a pope. And, you know, Kurt Aland, you know, his name is on that. And that's gone through a bunch of revisions and until the place where it's at now, which is the NA 28th edition. And so this is the text that they're following. This is a text that they're defending. It is based upon Unitarian influence. The Bible societies basically had a huge Unitarian influence. In 1804, when the Bible societies first started with people like William Wilberforce and other people, they didn't really set down certain parameters because they wanted to make it a non-denominational sort of thing. But by 1831, there were so many Unitarians in that group that key speakers getting up to talk about God, and they were praying in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. They were getting booed by Unitarians. So Unitarians are like Jehovah's Witnesses sort of thing. They don't believe in the deity of Christ. They don't believe in the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit being a Trinity and this type of thing. So they were booing these people for using the name of Jehovah and stuff. So this was happening in 1831. So a lot of these Trinitarians left and formed the Trinitarian Bible Society. And so in 1831, that's when it started. And so they were only promoting Trinitarian publications, you know, Trinitarian Bibles, and they only wanted Trinitarians to work on these Bibles. And so they were printing the King James. And so eventually the Bible societies, they were very influential. And so we see that by the time Westcott and Hort came around, there were a lot of Unitarians in key positions in the academy, Azra Ebbett, and I'm pretty sure Caspar Rene Gregory. I often get him mixed up with von Soden, but either one of them, they were Unitarian. Lots of people were Unitarian. And so, you know, George Van Smith worked with Westcott and Hort, was on the committee, had communion with Westcott and Hort, and caused a huge upheaval in Oxford at the time. And they wanted to kick him off the committee, but Westcott and Hort said, if you kick him off, we're going to leave too. We're all going to walk. And so they fought for him to be on there. So Unitarian, it's like having a Jehovah's Witness. Like if I made a Bible version, I had a Jehovah's Witness working on it, you would think that, you know, there would be something wrong with me or my discernment, or you probably wouldn't even want to read a book written by me, or you would always just think in the back of your mind, there's something wrong with this guy. You know, he's hanging around Jehovah's Witnesses, for crying out loud. Well, that's how I think of Westcott and Hort. I just think, well, what sort of discernment do these people have, you know? But, you know, this is what we see. This is the Bible that they're peddling. They're trying to get us to away from the traditional text, and they're trying to get us to have a Unitarian Bible. So these guys might believe in the Trinity. They might believe in the deity of Christ. They might believe in certain sound doctrines to make, you know, to say I'm a Christian. But at the end of the day, they're promoting a text that is that is fully corrupted. And it only takes one corruption in a Bible to ruin it. You know, if I had the reading, for God so loved the world that he sent Joe Biden, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Or if I have another one, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, which one are you going to read? Which one do you think you will want your churches to read? And of course, you're going to get the one with the correct reading. And so that's the thing. We've just gone through their stuff and gone, that's weird. That's wrong. No, that's from Unitarians. Why have they deleted this? And there's certain things that are in all the modern Bibles that even James White will agree with us. Like, say, 1 Timothy 3:16. He believes that the reading should be God was manifest in the flesh, not who appeared in a body. He thinks that. He said, it's what he says in his book. I could read it to you, but obviously we're going to go through and look at some more stuff in the King James only controversy. Can you trust the modern translations? I would say absolutely not. You can't trust them. You can't even trust them to be trustworthy in a sense where they say stuff in their preface of what they've done and how they've done it. And when you go to the actual text and look at what they've done, it's oftentimes contradictory. So either they're purposely doing that, or to give them the benefit of the doubt, they're just lousy in their scholarship. Because like I've pointed out in my last 3 videos about the New King James, clearly, Mark Ward saying, well, in the preface, they say they followed the Textus Receptus. They followed Scrivener. And when you check it, they didn't. There's many places they depart from Scrivener. And so I don't know how Mark Ward can get around that, except by just going to weaker arguments. He just finds someone who has weaker arguments and just deals with their stuff. And it's like, well, why don't you deal with what I'm saying? So anyway, let's keep listening to James.
That's not voodoo, and that's not art. It's history. Now, those of you who go back and listen to my first introductions to CBGM, one of my questions then, and that I still have now, is exactly how CBGM maintains the text in its historical context, because it doesn't look at witnesses as manuscripts. It looks at the text, not the dating, not the manuscript, things like that. So it sort of dehistoricizes it. And that's, that was one of the very first questions I had. And Peter Gurry talks about it in his dissertation. And, those are still questions. And until we have all of it done, which hopefully we will in a few years, I'm not sure we can necessarily really start digging into the answers to all those questions. But voodoo? No. I'll tell you what voodoo is. It's looking at Revelation 16:5 and turning it into this is the most important thing on the planet. No, it's a textual emanation.
It's the most important thing on the planet. No, I just wrote a book about your King James only controversy about Revelation 16:5, and you refuse to deal with it. Who looks like the fool here, James? Because you spent time doing that, okay? And so you bring it up in all of your debates and all of your, it's not hard to find James White talking about Revelation 16:5 in America at some church somewhere. He's been bringing it up. So I do a book against that. And he's just like, you're just desperate. Let's listen to exactly what he says, because this is the type of slander that I keep saying to people. Look, James White just slanders people. He doesn't deal, like, if someone wrote a book against me, like when TurretinFan went through my book, okay, he offered 20 videos of refutation, and I went through and did like 31 videos or something like that, examining what he was saying. So sometimes it was like 2 videos a week, and I was going through it. It was taking up a lot of my time, but I just wanted to make sure that what I was saying was correct. He pointed out, a few typos. He pointed out that in one section, it wasn't actually Calvin who said something. It was his editor. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you're a Calvinist. You know more about that than me. And so I was like, cool, that's good to know. So in my next edition, I guess I'll put, not Calvin, but Calvin's editor or whatever. There was something I said about James White and the tenacity of the text and things like that. So I was glad. I'm always glad for a critique because I agree with truth. When new information comes my way, I go, okay, let's examine it and see, should I accept it or should I reject it? When new information comes James White's way, he goes, well, apparently this goes against what I think and against my presuppositions, and so I'm not even going to look at it. And he announced that publicly that he wasn't going to read my book. So how can he actually reject my position if he doesn't know it? If he doesn't know my position, how can he reject it? It's so strange. But this is, James, Mr. Teachable, James White, he obviously doesn't want to look at this. I think he's embarrassed by how many errors I've pointed out that are in his text. And so all he can do now is just say, yeah, this Nick Sayers guy, his whole world revolves around Revelation 16:5. Well, you could say that about TurretinFan. TurretinFan read through my book and did 20 videos. That's a lot of time. The only reason that I kept doing refutation videos is because I'd listen through it and go, no, he said this wrong. No, he's basically just sort of said everything was wrong. And in a sense where, when I'm saying I'm glad that he critiqued it, he's pretty much the only one who has done something like that. Now, James Snap Jr., he read 100 pages of it and said, I think it's stupid or something like that. It wasn't really much of a, he wasn't really offering much. He wasn't saying, oh, this is good, you made a good point here or whatever. But see, TurretinFan was mostly just going through and trying to work out an argument of how he can say that what I'm saying is wrong. Where, when I debated Stephen Boyce on this, he said that the section on Nomina Sacra was one of the best he's ever seen. So, but I don't think he says that now. and the thing is, it's as soon as I become offside with these guys, it's like, his work's just rubbish. But I'm seeing TurretinFan doing videos on the Ho'on and Esomenos or Ekomenos, the one which is and was and is to come, and the Triadic Declaration, which I write about. And he's saying, well, it's the name of God. He's pointing out this name of God. He's going through his methodology, his way. And eventually, if he keeps studying in that direction, he will go, okay, it's the past, the present, future. It's the three I ams, which are the past, present, and future in Exodus 3:14, and these equal Jehovah. And so that's exactly what Theodore Beza says in his annotations in Revelation chapter 1:4. So this is, to me, it's just elementary now. I don't even think twice about what I'm going to say about that sort of stuff. But James Wise just like, you're obsessed. Listen to what he says.
It's looking at Revelation 16.
Okay, so this is what he's saying voodoo is.
Into the answers to all those questions, but voodoo? No. I'll tell you what voodoo is. It's looking at Revelation 16:5 and turning it into this is the most important thing on the planet. It's a textual emanation.
So then he says it's a contextual emendation. So he's rejecting what Theodore Beza says about it. He's rejected all of my study on it, and he's rejected the Beatus of Light Banner, all the other stuff. But then it comes down to his categorization of in Greek. So basically, it's just understanding that it is the name of Jehovah. Clearly, you can see why they put holy on it. It's just to me, it's just an absolute no-brainer. But these guys want to keep it complicated because that suits their story. It's a very simple explanation, and it explains all the other readings, which is what they say you have to do in textual criticism. And so anyway, so we've got Alan Stewart is in the house. Good morning, y'all. So that was James White today, talking about my meme. And so I'll put my meme up there again. Where are we? So this is the meme. I thought it was pretty good. Anyway, so I wanted to show that just because it was James White today. But let's go to this video here. So this is King James Only Controversy, chapter 3a, Dr. James White versus Stephen Anderson. So it's James White going through and talking about Stephen Anderson. Now, I'm doing this not because I agree with Stephen Anderson on every point, but because it wouldn't matter if he was critiquing Ruckman or critiquing whoever, Peter Van Cleek or Thomas Ross or whoever is critiquing. It's just that James White is talking about it. And so that's the main reason. So in our study, we're in chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled Starting at the Beginning. And so this is exactly what James White does. He starts going back to the basics of bibliology. So if you were to even just jump on Wikipedia and read through it, I mean, I understand Wikipedia is influenced by all sorts of, Mormons and Muslims and all sorts of different people. But I'm talking about, a Christianized sort of Wikipedia, if you were just to jump online and just start searching around some basic understandings of the Bible written by Christians, you would get what James White is trying to explain in this chapter. But then every now and then he's just throwing a curveball and he is defending the critical text and saying how silly the King James movement is. So he says in chapter 3 on page 41, he says, if most believers had a solid grasp on the history of the Bible, and then he says a little bit more, but he says the King James only issue would be more of a slight disagreement than a full-blown controversy. So what he wants to do is he wants you to understand his perspective, the critical text perspective, because a lot of people only have a Textus Receptus perspective, the Bible going through, to 400 years ago, 1611, then through the Textus Receptus, then through the Byzantine text, and then into the early church. And so he doesn't want us to believe that. He doesn't want anyone to believe that. He wants us to believe that the Bible is in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and a spattering of other documents. There's only about 50 that are really on their side. We've got over 5,000 that are in what would be called the Byzantine majority text. And so he wants us to give up our text and go with his, which is basically primarily Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So Hosky has said there was 3,000 differences just in these alone in the Gospels. And there were 17 other criteria that Hosky didn't use. Had he used them, there would have been so many thousands more differences. And when you're looking at the criteria for people collating manuscripts and examining them, the Alexandrian texts are not critiqued as thoroughly as a Byzantine text, because they know that most Byzantine texts are the same. So that's why oftentimes a reading is just regulated to a BYZ in the bottom of the Nestle Alarm 28 apparatus, or an M for majority. But sometimes there might be a split, or one manuscript says something different or whatever. But the vast majority of the time they're cohesive. They're saying the same things. And so when they get to these manuscripts like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, there's so much difference between them that they actually sort of have to dumb it down a little bit. They don't want to count all of the differences, because that would just, you would be busy for the rest of your life just on these tiny little variants. I mean, 400,000 variants. That's the count by, I think Peter Curry's made that number. So his goal in this is just sort of to go back to the beginning of bibliology. And he says they're talking about such things like manuscripts, text types, and textual variants, where the reality is, if you just simply put your faith in the word of God that's found in the King James version of the Bible, you don't really have to know all this sort of stuff. I've studied into it a lot. And at the end of the day, it's sort of like learning all about evolution or something like that. It's like you're probably just better off not even knowing about it. But if you want to make a debate, if you want to have a good apologetic look into it, study it and think about it. But these three things, manuscripts, text types, and textual variants, they're all sort of redefined by the critical text people. So instead of looking at the vast majority of manuscripts, now James White was just talking about the CBGM. Oh, well, they can look at these manuscripts and do this and do that. But they don't really care about the majority of manuscripts at the end of the day. They use that as their apologetic. And apologists parrot people like Dan Wallace and James White because it sounds good to say, oh, we've got this embarrassment of riches. We have 5,200 manuscripts or whatever the number is, 5,500. Some people say, we've got this many manuscripts and we've got way more than Homer and all this sort of stuff. But most of the time, they only follow two of these manuscripts. So, imagine you're out, you hear a street preacher and he's saying, we have, in our Bible, we have 5,500 manuscripts that we've looked at and we get the best of those readings. And, we have an embarrassment of riches, and you get convinced that the Bible is accurate. The Bible is trustworthy. So you go along to this guy's church and you think, well, maybe I'll stop being an atheist and I'll start believing. And she's like, okay, where's this, 5,500 manuscripts? I want to see them. And it's like, well, look, you can go online and see a bunch of photos and stuff, but we don't really care much about them. We just care about Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So it's not really being honest, is it? It's a bit like, some groups, and I've done this myself in my younger days. You're running like a rock concert or something. Come out and hear this guy, and then once they come along, the band halfway through, it's sort of like, oh, they got a few Jesus lyrics here and there, but then someone gets up and starts preaching or sharing a testimony, and they're like, oh, I didn't know it was a Christian thing. So they sort of get tricked. And it's funny that Paul says, don't use deceptive methods. I can't remember the exact scripture, but it just came to mind. It says, nor of deceit or something like that. But we shouldn't use deceptive methods, especially when we're trying to win people to our position. It's sort of like we're dangling a carrot in front of someone and they're following it, and then the trap door opens and they're in a room like, oh, I'm here, and so we'll say a prayer. We shouldn't try and manipulate people into Christianity. I know some people think that that's being loving and that's being caring and just by any means sort of thing. It's like, no, you still have to sort of stay within the realms of morality. I remember one time I was with this group, and what they did is they staged a car accident. So we were out street preaching and having a great time, and people were listening, and I'm in the middle of talking to someone and they're very interested. And then this guy in the church drove past, and he keyed up someone to hit the front of the bonnet and then lie down like on the side of the road. And so he's lying down on the side of the road. A guy ran out from the pub who was a doctor, and he's trying to revive him. And it got a crowd. And then this guy started preaching, and the doctor guy was like, you guys are idiots. It just, even I was disgusted in it. I was like, what are these guys doing? And the guy who I was talking to wasn't interested anymore. He walked off. And I'm thinking, these guys are just clowns. Like, this is the most stupidest thing. But people do, they do things, they say things to get people into their church or into Christianity or whatever. And a lot of the time it's just actually repelling people. You don't have to go and just bullhorn street preach out the front of, Walmart or something like that. You can go and just chat to people. Go and talk. Sometimes that can be like, I'm afraid of you actually conversing with someone. Let's just bullhorn them, But I'm not against that either. I'm not against bullhorning and all that. So, but when it comes to manuscripts, some of the apologists, they're just lying. And unfortunately, James White, Dan Wallace, and others like them, they're training apologists around the world to lie about the manuscripts and to say, oh, we have all these manuscripts and everything. What they're not saying is the Bible has changed. In the last 150 years, we were all reading the King James, and now we're not. We're reading these other ones. So they have to either say that the church was just duped and now we're better, or, obviously they're going to say that, because they're not going to say that they've got this new Bible on the scene, but they're going to say, oh, we've got better research, and it doesn't really affect any of the cardinal doctrines, no doctrines have changed and all this sort of stuff. Where really, when you start examining it, there are a lot of changes, and there are things that are unsettling. There are people who have been involved with these changes who have been absolutely heretical, Unitarians, etc., Jesuits, Carlo Martini. And I'm not just saying some guy was a closet Jesuit. He was in line to be a pope, for crying out loud. And he's working on the text. Why isn't James White writing a book saying, heretics in the academy, where we need to let people know about this? Like someone like David Cloud, he's written Unholy Hands on God's Holy Word, and he mentions a lot of these names. But you don't find James White doing that, do you? Because you don't bite the hand that feeds. The Bible industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is huge. It's a juggernaut. It's like coming against Big Pharma. We're the guys saying, hey, you shouldn't be saying this. That's not science. Oh, you're thinking for yourself, are you? Do you know the Greek and Hebrew? Do you know, where have you studied? What's your PhD? And you just left there going, guys, you don't have to be Rain Man. You don't have to be savant to figure it out. Just go and do a comparison with half of these Bibles and pray, use your discernment, look at these things. But if you do have the brain power to be able to, look at the original languages and look at this argumentation, if you are honest with yourself, you will come to a Textus Receptus position. But let's let James start chatting about Stephen Anderson.
Real quick. Well, not real quick. Some responses to Stephen Anderson, chapter 3.
We'll just slow him down there because he already talks really fast.
He's done all 10 chapters. We got to get to him eventually. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because, sadly, you're going to hear Stephen Anderson saying many things that are frighteningly parallel to the textual traditionalists. Frighteningly parallel.
So it's a bit like saying, let's look at young earth creationists. Nick Sayers is making the claims, similar claims to Ken Hovind, like trying to link you together. So he's been for years just pointing out the lowest hanging fruit. This book, in the beginning of it, when he's describing King James onlyists, he mentions Peter Ruckman, Gail Ripplinger, Sam Gipp, and it's like, hang on, you might even know who these people are. But if you defend the King James or the Textus Receptus, you apparently have this genetic link to these people. You're in their group. You're wearing their T-shirt. You didn't even know it, did you? You're wearing their T-shirt. So it's a bit like, libertarians. They're like, say Ron Paul followers. And people are like, you're a Democrat. And it's like, I'm not a Democrat, or you're a Republican. It's like, well, I'm not a Republican. You'll get thrown into, you're pigeonholed. And so this is what James White does. This is, a classic straw man argument. And he just puts us in a place where we're guilty by association, and we're not even associating most of the time. Yes, some are associating. Yes, some are of that school and say things that I don't necessarily agree with. Seventh-day Adventists believe in young earth creationism. My Jehovah's Witness friend, who I talk to a lot, he was showing me Ray Comfort videos on, that evolution .org or whatever it was, and they had this really good Ray Comfort video going around about 10 years ago. He was showing me that, saying, oh, this guy just makes these people who believe in evolution, it makes them out to be bozos and idiots. And I'm like, yeah, but yeah, Ray Comfort, like we all, most like back then I was using a lot of Ray Comfort stuff. I disagree with some of it today. But at the end of the day, they believe in young earth creation. So am I linked to a Jehovah's Witness now? Am I linked to Seventh-day Adventists who have their own creation ministries and stuff? So am I linked to them? So just because someone reads the King James or defends the King James or wants the King James only label or whatever, it doesn't mean we're all the same. Like, this is just a fallacy. And this is James White majors in this. His book is just filled with this sort of stuff. Like someone like D.A. Waite, he was clearly coming out and saying, look, I'm not a Ruckmanite. We're TR people. They called their society the Dean Burgon Society, for crying out loud. And Ruckman was different, and they were making a distinction. But no, James White is like, these guys like, D.A. Waite and Ruckman, they're all just the same, And so he doesn't do categories well. He oftentimes criticizes other people for not doing categories. He's not looking in his own backyard here. And so Alan Stewart said in the James White Peter Van Cleek debate, James White ridiculed the idea of faith concerning the Bible translation issue. Yeah. Like that's, and I've thought of that when I said pray about this stuff. James White scoffing at that. and it's like, well, shouldn't we be praying about this? Shouldn't, if there was like people searching for a Bible like these guys are, they don't have a Bible yet, but they will get a Bible, I guess, as soon as the computer technology comes up to speed and Skynet's in, and CBGM is going to spit out the answers, even though CBGM spat out 2 Timothy 3:10 with the Ook reading, and James White rejects it. Isn't that amazing? It spat out that reading, and he's like, well, I don't follow that. And it's like, well, this is what your thing is doing, But if there was a crew that got together and we're like, we want to find out what the real words are of the Bible, wouldn't you think that they would be praying, that they would be godly people? See, James White's like, oh, I don't care if atheists are involved, and if Bart Ehrman had just sort of said Jesus a little bit and didn't, bite the hand that feeds, and, just sort of went, well, I'm a Christian, and just sort of lied about it, they would still follow him. You know what I mean? He would still be just a revered guy in the academy. I mean, Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. Who are these people? I'm talking to Grantley MacDonald. He's written the dissertation about 1 John 5:7, and he's an atheist. He says Christians are dangerous, like radical terrorists. That's Christianity. He says that in his dissertation. And so, anyway, Jimmy Coates says, yes, he did, Alan. He equated it to Mormonism's burning in the bosom. So, look, I'm not saying that we just go by, because I do hear some people using this type of debate, which isn't really strong if you're using a debate. Yes, we should all be praying. We should all be saying, okay, let's pray. But when it's just like, okay, the final answer is I'm just going to pray and God's going to show me exactly which one. Well, I think there are things that have to go into that. But at the end of the day, someone who simply does pray, but they end up with the King James. They end up with the Textus Receptus. They're way better off than someone. But the thing is, there are good people out there who just don't know any better. I know some really good friends, people who I know and like, and pastors who I support, and they'll put up an ESV quote, and I'm like, but they don't know, and I'm saying of people who are in foreigners, they're not in first speaking, their English isn't their first language, and so this type of argumentation can go over their head until they're really shown, and that they don't know that there's 100 Bibles on the market. They're just sort of like, oh, okay, well, this is the English Bible, I've just figured out what that reads, and let's put it on my Facebook sort of thing. It's like most people have no idea, and a lot of English speaking Christians just are completely oblivious to this type of battle. They go to the Christian bookshop and everything's all sales and everything, so that they don't hear this type of thing. People who hear this type of thing and know about this type of thing are usually people who are very interested in it. They're, if you're like, it's quite amazing to hear people talk about world events. I was talking to someone the other day about World War II, and they said, oh, I'm not really interested in like World War II and all that sort of stuff. And I was just sort of like, it's not really about being interested in it. It happened. We got to learn from it. We got to, and it's fascinating, and but some people are like that. Some people are just like, well, the whole Bible issue. Some people are like that, and so what can we do? But James White, he wants to educate people about manuscripts and about text types, but it's interesting, the CBGM, they've claimed that it's done away with these text types. So there's no longer these 4 classifications of the text. And then they're talking about textual variants. Well, oftentimes what happens is they talk about, there's 400,000 textual variants, and they say, that's too much, but only 1% of them are relevant. Instead of just saying, say that, that's fine, but then focus on the 1%. But they just seem to go, it's 1%. So there's this difference that there's like, you got the Textus Receptus here, you got the critical text here, and there's like 6% difference. And it's like that's a lot of difference. And so Mark Ward's just like, they're the same, that's why are you getting yourself all worked up? Just if you want to read the TR, read that. If you want to read the critical text Bibles, if you want to read the King James, fine. He'll still tease you, and James White will throw you into a King James only camp, and you'll still get the little star, the yellow star you have to wear, and it's like, you're one of them. It's like, but I'm not, I'm not even related at all. No, you're one of them. We know. Alan Stewart says, it demonstrates the atheism of the academy when faith isn't allowed, even when Christians are debating each other. Yeah, it does seem to be something that James White mocks a lot. People are like, well, we should be praying about this. And it's like, you're a Mormon, burning of the bosom sort of thing. Avery F says, Bible-believing pastors are among God's greatest gift to the church. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Let's just continue on with this.
I've seen stuff posted in the past 5 days on Facebook by Reformed men that epistemologically is no different than what Steven Anderson is saying in a number of these criticisms. And
like I said, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, they believe in young earth creationism. So because you say the same thing, does that make you akin?
That's frightening.
Frightening. Just these weasel words. It's frightening.
It's just frightening. So dive in. Steven Anderson's response to chapter 3 of the King James only controversy.
And he starts out by kind of just insulting people that are King James only. He says, the KJV only controversy plays upon the fact that most Christians today are more than slightly fuzzy on the particulars of how we got the Bible, how it was passed down through the years, and how it has been translated into the English language. So James White always likes to act like he's so smart and everybody else is so dumb and people that are King James only aren't smart and blah, blah, blah. So obviously that's not really an argument.
That wasn't an argument. It was an observation, and it is a painfully true observation. The fact is the King James only movement is based upon the use of double standards. Anyone who would know.
So just listen to what he's saying here. So, Stephen Anderson said, he's basically just mocking people who are, KJV people, Textus Receptus people. And you got to understand, he's just done a whole chapter on who the King James guys are, the grandma on the couch, the majority text guys. So he's saying James Knapp and Maurice Robinson, are in this camp. Their Texas, their majority text position, Byzantine priority position, is King James only. Then you've got Textus Receptus only people. Then you've got people who are sort of more like me, but he lines it up and says inspired King James, as if it's sort of like, a magical thing that happened, rather than just going, no, God promised to preserve his word. That's what's happened, And then he's got people who sort of believe that it's a double inspiration and it's sort of floated down on a cloud sort of thing. And so that's who he's talking about. Okay, so it's got to be remembered that he's saying, well, these people just don't know their stuff. So people like D.A. Waite don't know their stuff. Kirk DeVitro, Phil Stringer, Gavin McGrath, Scott Jones, so many people who I know would just run rings, like Thomas Ross. He run in the debate. He ran rings around James White, Peter Van Cleek, Jeff Riddle, intelligent guys, and he's just saying that these people. It's just an observation. I was just looking around and going, these people are ignoramuses. Now, if I said, okay, well, people who believe in young Earth creationism, a lot of them are unintelligent. Well, James White believes in young Earth creationism. I assume he still does. Like people like TurretinFan, he does, and I think Jeff Durbin, is on the same page with them, and so. But the thing is, do these guys know all the argumentation about young Earth creationism? Most Christians don't know that. They could sort of hold their weight against someone who's, not like just the average person who is an atheist who believes in evolution, believes in a Big Bang theory sort of thing. You'd be able to work your way through that and explain why that's got a lot of holes in it. But if you ran into someone who's a scientist, what can you say? You're sort of like, well, and when I was interviewed by T-Jump, I actually sort of avoided the whole scientific concepts, because what he does, he gets people to talk about natural sciences, and then he just waffles on about that all day. Where I didn't really want to fight him on that ground. I wanted to talk about Bible prophecies that have been fulfilled. And what I did by doing that was I showed that he didn't know really anything about the Messianic Bible prophecies, because he was saying, oh, it's so vague, you can't even figure it out. I'm like, well, you don't know about it. If you haven't figured it out, what Christians are saying, then you actually haven't had a deep look into it. So you're rejecting something that you can't understand. Not if you because I can understand how the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus came back in 1914 invisibly. Obviously, I don't agree with it, but I can understand how they got there. Now, there might be some leaps of faith, and there might be some some data missing and stuff like that. But I can go, well, that's how they got there. How did they get to millions now living will never die in 1925, or how did they get to the 1975 date, and how did the Millerites get to 1843 and then go, well, it's going to happen next year in 1844, and then say, well, this was the beginning, and not repenting of that. And so understanding those type of things, you put yourself in their shoes and you try to figure it out. So T-John has never really done that at a level where he can understand what the Bible's saying about the 70th week of Daniel and Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and all that sort of stuff. And so, but at the end of the day, most King James people are just average Joes, okay? We just read the Bible for our own spiritual nourishment. We pick up the words of God. We hear the words of the shepherd. They speak to us. They encourage us to be good Christians, to love our families, to be good to other Christians, to, believe, to pray, to trust in God. And, that's usually why you read the Bible. You don't just get the Bible like, okay, it's a machine gun and I'm going out in the world to attack people. You can use the Bible in defense of Christianity, but at the end of the day, the first and primary reason why you have a Bible is so that you can feed yourself. And most people who do that aren't academic people. And if you get something like the King James, which is still so popular, if you get, say, half of the Bible readers, if they're still reading the King James, then you're going to get a lot of people in there who are just they're not intellectuals. They're not academics. And so they're just saying, yeah, well, I won't read that NIV. Down with the NIV, up with the KJV. And they're going to say things like that. But on the other side, Westcott and Hort, they've formulated this new text with Unitarians. Then it's gone through Everhard Nessel, and it's gotten to the NA28 group that they have today. And a lot of these people are in an academic setting, like, say, the 12 prophets of the Jehovah's Witnesses who are writing articles for the Watchtower and the Awake magazines and putting stuff on the internet on jw.org. They're intellectual people. They're wrong, but they're intellectual. Bart Ehrman's an intellectual, but he's wrong on many, many things. And so the average Joe just reading their Bible is not an intellectual, okay? But there are intellectuals in the Textus Receptus and King James movement. And so that's why these guys just look at the low-hanging fruit. They're looking for, it's like an atheist looking for a young earth creationist to say something unscientific. But they just, I believe the Bible, God created the world. They've just got faith that God can keep his promises, but it's not going to hold water against someone who knows the scientific lingo. They're just going to run rings around you. But the average Christian just goes, I'm a young earth creationist. So the average Christian just goes, I believe in the King James. So, but it's getting more and more popular to have these other Bibles. But say 30 years ago, the argumentation was mostly just from pastors and concerned parents who were like, well, hang on, I've got the NIV for my child, but it's got these verses missing. What's going on? And so they weren't making the strongest arguments. And the people who were bringing this upon the world were usually coming from academia. It's like, the 12 prophets of the Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your door. And you're trying to formulate arguments against it. And they've already thought of all these arguments. They've already got an answers book that they can just repeat an argument. And you're like, oh, these guys, they seem to be running rings around me. But, the thing is, God is also raising up a standard against this type of rubbish, because when you look at the people who are coming forward and defending their position, I mean, James White seems to be the one who's, consistently, he's doing these debates. He only does them every now and then nowadays, like the LSB, and he did that debate against Peter Van Cleek. But if his argumentation is the best they have to offer, all you have to do is just look at the refutation videos of Peter Van Cleek has done, or look at what Thomas Ross has said, that they tear James White to pieces and point out a whole bunch of new errors that a lot of people didn't realize were in his book. I've done that with Revelation 16:5 to the point where James White probably only knew about 5% of what's known now about Revelation 16:5. He knew nothing. And that's why all he can do is mock it, because he couldn't see this. He didn't see it. What he should do is humble himself and go, yeah, well, this guy studied into it. I should really think about it, and I should offer a response. But he's like, I'll never read it. This guy's obsessed. All he can do is mock and tease. And then point to people who are like, Gail Riplinger and Ruckman, and, people who are just, some people are smart. Some people are just, goofy, oddballs, whatever. I'm not saying that about everything that these people have said. So sometimes these people can say stuff that is true, just like the Seventh-day Adventists can say stuff that's true about young earth creationism. But, we don't have to be a part of their crew. But these guys just keep putting us in. They're obsessed with pigeonholing you and me. They're obsessed with it. As soon as you meet someone who's like against the King James, they're like, well, you're a King James. I've had so many people say, no, you're a King James only. So you just have to admit it. And I'm like, well, according to whose standard? What James White's like? If I go through James White's standard, if I just pretty much go to church and read a King James, I'm a King James onlyist. If I'm Maurice Robinson, I'm a King James only. It's just silly. It's ridiculous. And so Jimmy Coates said, 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Absolutely. We believe God. He has preserved his words. We have them available to us today. They're not just in some monastery somewhere. They're not just in a cave somewhere. We have them available. The people of God have them. They're accessible to us today. How can you be held accountable by Jesus? He says, you'll be judged by the words that I say. Well, if you don't know, if he said words, you're like, oh, I'm not sure if you lied, Jesus, and said you weren't going up to the feast. Because the other one said you're not going up yet, which makes sense. But the other, scholars were browbeating me over the head and saying, don't be a King James onlyist. And Avery F says, along the same line of thought, biblical atheists are a gift from someone else. Yes, there is that as well. And Satan comes as an angel of light. We see that. And so these guys come along and say, hey, I'm going to teach you all about the Bible. And so this is what James White's doing. In the beginning, starting at the beginning, we're talking about manuscripts, text types, and textual variants. And King James onlyists are just, they don't know much about this sort of stuff. Well, why don't you just focus on those who have the strongest argument? If James White did that, and Mark Ward and Dan Wallace, it would be a lot better for everyone. I mean, look at the Ankerberg show. I mean, Joe Chambers. Joe Chambers is a pastor, and sure, he's got some really good things to say, but at the end of the day, you've got people who are trained in textual criticism coming up against a pastor, and I understand that D.A. Waite, he didn't want to be part of that, because I think there was a certain criteria that he was like, no, they didn't meet the criteria. So it was, what was his name? Strauss, he was on there. But then they had Sam Gipp, and these guys don't believe the same thing. And so it was just strange. But Alan Stewart says, I'm voting for Granny for KJV Cult Club president at the annual picnic next year. Well, I think what we're going to do is all of us King James people, we're going to have to nominate someone, because we've got to do a Jim Jones type of thing, and either shoot people in the back of the head or drink the Kool-Aid or whatever they did, because we're a cult, and so that's what cults do. Cults are going to cult. She got my vote. Yep, I'm voting for. So maybe we'll pick out some random King James grandma reader, and we'll set her up as our guru, And because we're a cult without a leader. And so that's why they have to nominate leaders. They're like, okay, well, do you realize your leader is this person? And you're like, you know, when you're arguing with Orthodox or Catholics, they're like, Martin Luther's your leader. I'm like, no. There's like 3 or 4 things that I agree with Luther on. A lot of the rest of it is sort of like, I don't know, you know, gray areas and things like that. So J.D. Hill is just loving this topic. So let's continue.
What the standards were for the translation, collation of the manuscripts, translation of those manuscripts into languages would recognize those double standards and hence dismiss King James onlyism. So it is a factual observation.
Okay, so he's talking very fast. And I've seen Stephen Anderson do this type of thing too, where he talks really fast and you've got to go back and you've got to check out every word. So let's just go back and see what he's talking about.
What the standards were for the translation, collation.
So we don't really know. Let's just go back a little bit further.
True observation. The fact is the King James only movement is based upon the use of double standards.
It's based upon the use of double standards.
Anyone who would know what the standards were for the translation, collation.
So anyone who would know what the standards are for translation, collation,
of the manuscripts, translation of those manuscripts into language.
Translations of those manuscripts into different languages.
Would recognize those double standards.
They would recognize those double standards. So we got double standards that James White's made up somewhere, and we go against them. If we understood how manuscripts were collated, if we understood how those manuscripts were translated into other languages,
and hence dismiss King James onlyism. So
we would just recognize King James onlyism. So if we were trained in textual criticism the way that he wants us to be trained, then we would just naturally go, oh, King James onlyism, it's a fallacy.
So it is a factual observation.
For example, John 6:47 in the King James says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life." Whereas the modern translations will say, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes has eternal life." So what's missing?
I just know.
So in the book, so the first page, he sort of talks about, we need to educate people. And then he's talking about, just the basic sort of stuff of bibliology. So he starts off with the biblical languages, talking about Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. And then, saying, Hebrew is a sort of harder language for him to learn, etc. And then he goes through disputes over translation. And he's got 2 principles that he looks at. There's textual disputes, and then there's translational disputes. So obviously textual disputes would have to do with differences between the critical text or the majority text or the Textus Receptus, this type of thing. But then translational disputes would be where there are words that are not that are translated differently. They're not translated synonymously. James White brings up only begotten based on monogenes. He says it should be unique, where I think the vast majority of good scholarship is against his position there. So he's rightfully pointing out, there's these textual disputes. And so what you'll see is someone like Mark Ward. He at first was like, I'm not dealing with the text, I'm just dealing with readability. But then all of a sudden he's like, which TR text do you follow? Because he thought he had a gotcha moment. And nearly everyone I've interviewed follows the conclusions of Hill as the underlying Greek text of the King James that they follow. And so, there's your textual dispute answered. But so one of the things is it's not just 2,900 less words and 8,000 changes in the critical text. It's how things are redefined as well. So many times you'll read a verse and you're like, hang on, that says something different. And it's worded around backwards or whatever. So you sort of sometimes are befuddled. Like I said, the LSB, I was just looking up the Granville Sharp rule the other night, and it says in the King James, waiting for the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, or that's in the New King James, of our God, of our God and our Savior Jesus Christ. So I was going through explaining how the King James translators did use the Granville Sharp rule, and I was explaining through that. But the LSB said, awaiting for the glory, no, the appearing of the glory. And I was like, no, we're waiting for the glorious appearing of Jesus Christ, not the appearing of the glory of Jesus Christ. It's like, it's not a glory cloud that happens at Bethel or something where, oh, the glory's turned up, it's just readings like that, and I wasn't even looking for that. It just popped out and I was like, that's different. So you see this sort of stuff all the time with these new Bibles. I mean, Will Kinney, who studied this a lot, he said he thinks there's more redefinitions. There's more problems with the redefinitions than there actually is in the underlying text. And that's saying a lot, because we know that the underlying text causes so many problems. But the redefinition of terms, Will Kinney is saying, well, this is something I think is even more important. And it's like, oh, no. So anyway, I'm just telling you, because we are going through the book, King James Only Controversy. And so James White's obviously answering Stephen Anderson. But Stephen Anderson just he skipped over like a couple of pages because he was just sort of saying, look, there's not really much to talk about there, but I just sort of mentioned some of these things as we're going through. I don't want to quote too much verbatim, but I thought I'd point out, at least if we go through a whole page, I want to sort of say, well, that he's got this on the page. And then he goes to the issue of John 6:47. So it has, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. And then James White has, in modern translations, it says, truly, truly, I say unto you, he who believes has everlasting life. So it doesn't say he who believes on me. So I'll let Anderson talk, and then I'm actually going to go to someone else's who's critiqued James White, which is a guy called Peter Ruckman. Now, I don't really know much about this book. This will probably be the first time I've ever read from it. But I was going through and looking for people who'd made arguments against James White, and he was one of them. And so I thought, well, I'm going to read through what he says. And so I'll shut that down. I'll just keep playing this section, and then I'll read what Ruckman says.
You know something? Do you hear a piano in the background? Let's listen to this again, and I'm going to see if you hear.
Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. Whereas the modern translations will say, truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes has eternal life. So what's missing? The King James says, he that believeth on me has everlasting life. The new versions just say, he that believes has everlasting life. So, believes anything, right? So anyway, this is a textual difference, obviously. The underlying Greek text of the modern versions leaves out on me, whereas the Textus Receptus has the on me.
There's someone practicing piano in the other room. Very, very. Since I have an earphone in, I didn't hear it when I was just listening over speakers, but one of his kids is practicing piano in the other room, which is fine. I think that's great. Okay, John 6:47. Notice what he said, that if you have the reading that is in the, oh man, I had this queued up, and for some reason it lost it. I don't know why it does that. John 6:47, truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes has eternal life. And in certain manuscripts, specifically in the Byzantine textual tradition, starting with Codex Alexandrinus, most of the Byzantine uncials and minuscule number of lectionaries and early translations, including Latin, Syriac, Sahidic, Bohairic, so on and so forth. You have Eis Me, believe in me. It is not found in P66, P75, Sinaiticus Vaticanus, CLTW, Theta 892, and some others. So his argument is that this is a textual difference. It is. And his argument is that if you don't have Eis Me, that means just believe anything. That's what's absurd. That is what is just simply ridiculous.
Well, regardless of what the conclusion is of people, whether it's Anderson or whatever, people see that this has strong attestation. So one of the things is James White goes against a lot of critical text people by saying that 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16, where it has God was manifest in the flesh, he actually says in the book that I agree with the conclusions of Dean John William Burgon. But then he goes on and talks about, well, it's not a conspiracy theory, and he just sort of waffles on about something else. But he clearly says that he agrees with Burgon on that. But the thing is, there are other places in the Bible that have stronger attestation in the Greek, and James White rejects it. And so I just can't understand this. He's got a standard for some verses, and when you go to somewhere nearby or another issue, he's dropping all those standards, and he's like, oh, like the last 12 verses of Mark. He's done whole debates on that, saying it's that these readings are Gnostic. But then when he was pulled over the coals by Jeff Riddle on that issue, and Jeff said, if you found a manuscript that was like Sinaiticus or Vaticanus in its weight, would you change your thoughts on that if it proved that the last 12 verses of Mark were genuine? And he said, yeah, I would. And so he was, 1 minute he's saying they're Gnostic readings, and he's proving that and saying, well, Jesus appeared to people, and that's like a avatar sort of thing, and he's trying to make out as Gnosticism. And then he's turning around saying, well, I'll believe all that if they can find another manuscript somewhere, which just goes to show you, the inconsistency. Like Jeff Riddle really thought out that argumentation. He really basically, well, in the interview that I had with Jeff, he just said it was sort of just given to him. James White just started saying this, and he was like, he couldn't believe it himself. He was like, wow, this guy is just basically destroying himself. And so I'll just show you what this issue is. So John 6:47. So the King James, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. So this is the Reformation text has this, where the other versions they don't say on me. Okay. So people are like, well, what usually happens with these verses is like in a book format, people will just grab this verse and say, okay, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. Now, say even D.A. Waite, like D.A. Waite probably has a page on it, or not a whole page, but I'll just look in his index, and we'll just see if we can find that. So where are we, John? 647. Okay, so it's on page 155. And it says, Greek text B and Aleph, English versions, NIV, NASB, New King James in the footnotes. The italicized portion is eliminated in the Greek text and the English versions specified above. This is perhaps the clearest theological errors in these three versions. To make salvation only a matter of believing rather than solely, as Christ said in this verse, believing on me, is truly another gospel. If you were trying to lead someone to Christ with the NIV or an NASV, using this verse, they could believe in anything and still have everlasting life. Whether in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or any of the false world religions. This is serious theological perversion. This is certainly a matter of doctrine and theology at this point. These Greek texts and these English versions are theologically deficient, whereas the Textus Receptus and the King James Bible are theologically superior. And so I understand that people go, well, it says he that believes has everlasting life. And then in the context, it might have, 2 chapters before, believes in me or believes in Jesus or whatever, And so that's the argumentation made. But clearly what these guys are saying is if you are using this verse to believe on Christ, because Christ is speaking, that's paramount. And so we're to believe in Jesus. We are to trust in Jesus. And that is taken out of this verse, isn't it? So the guy who made Scion of Zion, he was part of the Dean Burgon Society. So the Ice ME, and these are the manuscripts, Aleph, B, C, these ones. Manuscripts that agree with the Textus Receptus, so we've got that. And then published text. So the affected teaching, and it's pretty much, I won't read through all that, but there's quite a lot there. Actually, what I'll do, I'll go back to the main page of Scion of Zion, because I want all you guys to know about these websites, because sometimes people are like, how did you get that information? Most of this is just online. You just got to know where to look. But let's go, because I actually haven't read this, but this is what Peter Ruckman has written a book, The Scholarship Only Controversy, Peter S. Ruckman. Now, I started going through it, and in all seriousness, I was struggling to follow it. Maybe I need to actually sit down and read the whole thing. Now, am I promoting Ruckman? Not at all. He's just a voice that is saying something about this issue that James White's bringing up, because I'm looking at everything. When I do my wiki site, the Textus Receptus Wikipedia style site, I'll put in there that James White says this, Dan Wallace says this, Will Kinney says this, I say this, Stephen Avery says that. Just whoever said something about it, I'll put it there. Erasmus said this, Beza said this, and I'll just go through, so that way people can just read through the whole lot and get the bigger picture. I'm not promoting Ruckmanism here. I'm just going, okay, well, this is what Ruckman thought, which I was actually struggling to go through and find the general pattern of this book. But then I just typed in John 6:47 and it came up. So let's read it. Okay. We should not be surprised to see Mr. White accusing King James only advocates of misusing the gospel message itself to enlist people to their side, frightening people into thinking the modern versions are somehow attacking faith in the Lord Jesus. Okay, so I know in James White's book, he mentions this as an example of a textual dispute. And then the next example is like a John 3:36, where it has believeth not the Son, with the NASB has does not obey the Son. So a lot of you know about that issue. So he's talking about translational dispute. So he's using these two examples, but he says he speaks about them later. But I thought, well, it's a good opportunity just to we'll just look at these and just see what's available with some critiques. But Peter Ruckman, it sort of feels weird using his material, because I usually say more against him than I do say for him. But let's see what he has to say. That was his comment after. So this must be later on in the book, okay, where James White talks about the actual issue. This was his comment after justifying two of the most heretical, dangerous, satanic omissions in Scripture, NIV and NASV, on John 6:47. We are misusing the gospel message. So that's what James White says. White doesn't even know what the gospel message is. If anyone did frighten anyone into throwing an ASV or an NIV or an NASV out the window, what in heaven would that have to do with misusing the gospel message? 1 Corinthians 15, 1-5, and Galatians 1, 8-10. Nothing. White doesn't know what the gospel message is, or if he does, he is talking like a slanderous fool. Paul warned saved people time and time again about people who were used by Satan, 2 Corinthians 11, pretending to be sheep, Acts 20, while lying like a dog, Titus 1:12, deceiving Christians with politeness, Romans 16:18. I've got to look that one up because that's what Mark Ward seems to be doing. That verse says in the King James, "For they are such which serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by their good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple." That's gold. I learned something from Ruckman. And corrupting the word of God, 2 Corinthians 2:17. Was he misusing the gospel message? Sick, baby, sick. Sick scholarship. Just as sick as anyone dying of Ebola. What a charge to bring against the apostle to the Gentiles to whom the gospel message was revealed, Galatians 1:8-12. Imagine a Christian honoring Jesus Christ by accepting the AV reading of John 6:47, being accused of misusing the gospel. Sick, sonny. I mean, blasts. Man, like strung out, fried Freddy. And so, being an Australian, a lot of this sort of stuff goes over my head, but it's an old sort of way of speaking. Most Americans would understand it. Who actually not only misused the gospel message, but destroyed it in John 6:47. Did you ask? It was the manuscripts described on pages 113, 121 to 122, and 155 to 159 of this work, Aleph and Vaticanus and P66. And what a bunch of turkeys bowed down to these corruptions in order to keep a sinner from believing on the one who spoke these words. White's buddies, that's who. No progress is possible in the department of textual criticism until the superstition, for we are persuaded that it is nothing less than superstition, which at present, 1890, prevails concerning the old uncials, 1, the Vatican Codex, referred to as B, and 2, the Sinaitic Codex, referred to as Allah. So that seems like it's something maybe Burgon wrote, or Miller, who did a lot of Burgon's material after he passed away. Maybe it's Hoskia, I'm not sure. But I don't want to go to the footnote because I have to scroll all the way down and all the way back, and so I don't know where I'll end up. In trying to deceive a sinner on how to be saved, White bet on 2 of the foulest Greek texts in existence, and then had the gall to accuse Bible believers of misusing the gospel message, when they identified the dirty scoundrels who printed the reading, or more properly, refused to give any reading, although the right reading was there. Note, all scholarship-only advocates think that they and their friends are being vilified when they are clearly being identified. I'd have to be in agreement with that. All Alexandrians have skins as thick as tissue paper. They cannot stand criticism or correction, let alone disrespect and ridicule. After all, they are gods, with a small g. When the NCC churches, so I'm not sure, I guess that's the National Council of Churches, I'm not really sure, in India got filled up with Bible-believing King James converts, and I mean, they were saved under an authorized version. Their pastors had pressure put on them to remove their churches from the NCC 1950 to 1960. When they voted to get out of the NCC, officials promptly took all of the pastors to court in clear violation of 1 Corinthians chapter 6. In any set of manuscripts in any text type in any translation of any version of any edition of any Bible extant on earth. So I'm not really sure what his beef is there, but something happened in those 10 years. They then seized the property of the church. The church was set on and threw the congregations out on the street, politely and courteously, of course. These were the pious hypocrites who have been quoting Jesus Christ from the Sermon of the Mount, Matthew 5:40 and 5:7, for 30 years. Then it's got Satan quotes scripture. Okay, so this is sort of, as far as I remember, just skipping through this, this is where he has his defense for John 6:47. Okay, he says, yeah, okay, Satan quotes scripture. So you can see how it's a little bit hard to follow what Ruckman's saying. He sort of, it's almost like he's preached this and someone's written it down. So I'm sort of like he's got things like, come on, man, come on, buddy, you're a fool. And it's sort of, it's quite weird, you know, but that's just the way, you know, he spoke and was. You know, look at what happens when we adopt one of Hort's canons of criticism, which he swore was valid. This one says, we should choose the reading that best suits the style of the reader. This is one of the 9 to 12 standards, see page 24 to 27, that were invented in order to get rid of the AV text. We will pretend that this one is valid, whereupon White and the whitewash crew will have to pretend this time that it is invalid. John's style is so obvious, along with his statement of purpose, John 20:31, that no one but a scholarship-only advocate could miss it. So it says, observe, hopisteon eis emi. So that's John 12:44. Hopisteon eis emi. So he's got that repeated quite a few times in John 12:44, 46, 11:25, 11:26, John 7:38, which has eis, and then John 14:12, which has eis. So the me is me. Okay, so that's what it means in English. Jesus Christ used the expression 8 times in the Gospel of John, but you are to believe, if you are as stupid as John Ankerberg, Kurt Aland, John MacArthur, James White, Erwin Nessel, and D.A. Carson, that he forgot it one time in John 6:47 in a discourse on the bread of life, John 6:35. He himself was the speaker in all 8 classes. And what did James White omit? Omission is the standard satanic method, another justifying one of the most illogical, irrational, and unreasonable mutilations of the New Testament. He omitted all of the facts given above, plus what follows. They always do. Facts to them are as unreal as fiction. The reading of the King James Bible is not only the majority text found in the vast majority of Greek manuscripts, but it is cited in the Didache, which was written more than 180 years before B or Aleph. He that believeth on me. So that's in Didache, which is pretty interesting, strong evidence. The Didache also backs up the Lord's Prayer in Matthew. How could a superb, accurate scholar fail to tell you about this material? And especially if he were a godly scholar. Quack, quack, Daffy Duck, White's promoters are sicker than he is. Make way for Saturday Night Live, goofball number 2. So I'm not sure if he's talking about the same topic here, but I'll just keep reading until we can sort of work it out. But he says, this chart is presented as part of an entire section that alleges that new versions are preventing a work salvation system, and yet I have written entire books defending salvation by grace through faith that utilize translations other than the KJV. as have many others. How can this be? So this is what James White's saying. It's like, I've written books about salvation, and so I didn't have to go to this verse or this other verse, and so this is the reason why James White's saying we can still find salvation in the Bible somewhere else. It's like, okay, so look at that for a minute. You never saw in print a goofier logic illustrated than that one. Look at that faked effeminate type of astonishment. How can this be? The nut is serious. He actually thinks he is asking an unanswerable question, so that you must accept the modern versions no matter what they teach. Read it again. How can this be? Well, Sonny, as they said back in the 1920s, it's just as easy as pie if you have a brain in your head. All you have to do is quote the verses that didn't teach a work salvation and avoid the ones that did. That's a good point. Who in the solar system wouldn't figure that out? Anyone who knows the contents of the Bible, and God knows Jimmy doesn't know enough about what is in it even to think clearly, knows that anyone can utilize any translation to prove anything. There are more than 100 verses in the AV that teach a faith and works plan salvation. How could you have read Fletcher's checks on works or John Wesley or Jacob Arminius and not have known this? Wesley cites the authorized version, so does Sam Jones, Peter Cathright, Francis Asbury, and every Methodist minister in America who taught a works system. White doesn't know church history. What does he know? He knows how to talk smooth and slick. So this is still talking about that verse. Okay, so I didn't intend to read it this far, but he is talking about this verse. So you see, Jimmy, the way it can be is simple. We realize that someone as dense and stupid as you is going to have a hard time understanding what I am about to say. But the truth is, an Alexandrian clique, when rain comes down, it falls right toward the earth. Think of that. How can that be? How can a thief be anxious to keep his money in a good bank? How can a man profess to believe something he doesn't believe? Well, Goofy, it is kind of like an adult, white, straight, male bureaucrat setting up and backing up queers, blacks, women, and children to get control of businesses run by an adult, white, straight males like himself. And so I don't know why he's his views were sort of like, KKK sort of views as far as the stuff that I've read about, clearly put him into that type of categorization, but not fully, because he was associating with people who were, Mexican. He was associating with black people, but he always saw them as inferior and spoke about it and wrote about it clearly. Okay, so goofball number 3. Here is a verse in question, 1 Peter 2:2. Here the nutty idiot version says, growing in respect to your salvation. Here is the textual problem according to the scholarship only advocate. How can he patch up this utterly false reading so Christians will go on buying NASVs or NIVs? That is the textual problem. The problem is quite real now. For some time, the goofballs, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and P72, a late papyrus from the 4th century, have evidently expanded the text so it would be fuller, according to 2/3 of White's book. This is an unpardonable sin. Okay, so he's still sort of talking about this, but not this time. Ice Soterion has been added to the text for the expansion of piety. So this is another issue. But he is still talking about John 6:48. So there's quite a lot in this. I'm just wondering where he finishes. I don't want to read this all night, but he definitely, I think he made a very good point about, let's just go back. And what I'll do, I'll throw this into the chat if anyone wants to, check it out or whatever. And as I said, I'm not endorsing Ruckman, but I think it's actually a good point here. There are 8 times where you see this type of pattern, and it does seem like this was dropped off, where if that is the case, see, that would fall under the critical text reading of or their canon of the hardest reading is the better one, because if it's dropped out and it doesn't match up with the harmonization of the rest of these sayings, well, that's a harder reading, so we have to go with it, which is really strange. They go with the hardest reading unless it's really, really dumb, and obviously dumb, then they don't go with it, so. But anyway, I'm going to just jump out of that because I think that's enough Peter Ruckman material for today. Let's get back to James White and Stephen Anderson.
Because all you have to do is look back just a few verses, and you will have the very same term being used of believing in me. That is in the context. It's already been used in John chapter 6. In fact, let me see. You have John 6:35. The one believing in me will.
I wonder if he's actually quoting this, because James White would have read through this. So here's the list. He says 6:35. No, it must be a different list. Anyway.
Never thirst. John 6:40, the one believing in him will have eternal life. It's found in John 7:38. It's found in John 11:25, 11:26, John 12:44. And this is the whole point. The whole point is the standardized form of ha pistuon, the active participle to believe, is followed by eis auton, in him, or eis eme, in me, when it's Jesus speaking. And so the point is, given that that's the standardized form in the book, then a scribe who is copying is more likely to look over and see ha pistuon and write ha pistuon eis eme, because they've already done that a number of times.
So, in other words, it's a pattern that John was making. I think Ruckman actually makes a really good point here. It is a pattern. So, like, what I might do, I might actually make a bit of an article on John 6:47 on my website. So I'll put all this on there. This is on Internet Archive, and so I'll link to it. But I mean, to me, it's a pretty good argument. Regardless of what I disagree with Ruckman, I think it actually makes logical sense. I mean, people turn around and say, well, we reject the last 12 verses of Mark because it doesn't sound like Mark, even though it's after the resurrection, probably the greatest thing to ever happen on the entire face of the world, the universe has happened. Jesus died and resurrected. So obviously after that is going to be different for the apostles, going to be different for the women. It's going to be different for everyone who is in the previous 15 chapters. And but it's like, oh no, that they don't use the same vocabulary as Mark, so we got to reject it. And it's like something different's happened. It's like going to the moon, if they did. But if someone went to the moon and came back, obviously they would have different things to talk about. It's like Christopher Columbus going to America and coming back. He's talking about different things. And so you can't just say, well, it didn't happen because you can't match up his vocabulary with what he was talking about before. He's talking about different things. So, but here, when you can see this type of pattern, that becomes the basis of rejecting it because there is a pattern. So they say, well, the last 12 verses of Mark, we can't see the same type of patterns that are in Mark, so we reject it. But then it's like, well, he can see the same type of patterns. Wouldn't you accept this verse? It's like, oh, no, we do the opposite here. And it's complete inconsistency. So Alan Stewart says, Stephen Anderson can be safely ignored. His audio isn't perfect. Thanks for letting us know that, James. Yeah, it's like when he looked at my meme, he's like, oh, it's very cheaply done sort of thing. Like, he expects us to mock him in a way that we spent a lot of time on it, because it's him. It's like coming against the Pope. Alan Stewart says, James White follows the evidence, not faith. Yes, but even then, the evidence completely disproves James White. It's a skewed evidence. It's like Seventh-day Adventist evidence for Jesus coming back invisibly. So that's the site, scionofzion.com, kjcomparisons.html. If you go there, you'll find that page that I was promoting. HD Hill says, thank you. Matt Singleton's in the house. Everyone's just chatting to each other. Skin as thin as tissue paper. Yes, that is spot on. Avery F says, yes, Alan, I've read this book. Dude, love to stick it to the critical text crowd. Alan Stewart says, I'm not a fan of Ruckman, obviously, but the insults are epic. Exactly. Matt Singleton says, James White is not a grace guy. He's a lordship guy. Yes. So that's where James stands. And I guess TurretinFan as well. So that's why you have the grace guys and debating against like Dan Chapper and TurretinFan. Avery F says Ruckman taught works salvation in different dispensations, so there's why he said that. Yeah, so Ruckman believes that after the rapture, it goes back to a works-based salvation like the Old Testament. So it's different. Matt Singleton says, remember he chastised a Reformed Baptist believer for witnessing with Stephen Anderson on the basis that Anderson taught easy believism unless you're gay. Yeah, I can't remember him doing that, but yeah.
Then to delete it, then to get rid of it. There's no reason for it getting rid of it. And even if you go, yeah, well, but I just want to go with majority text reading or whatever else. The point is that to say that it would mean believes in whatever, believes in anything is just absurd. There's no way that the reading as it stands in the Nestle-Aland text today could possibly be exegeted as meaning anything other than believe in me.
So you're saying you can have in me deleted, but that's exactly what it means. It's like strange.
So just another example of
if you took those words out, wouldn't it mean something else?
The imbalance, the lack of,
like if Jesus walked up to his disciples and said, follow me. But imagine he walked up to Matthew and said, follow. I mean, it's like, and you've ruined the verse. It says, follow me, It's probably not the best example, but I'm sure there are places where, Jesus is clearly saying, you believe. Well, this is probably one of the best examples. And I guess that's why Ruckman's spent 3 or 4 pages on it.
Care, the lack of anything on the part of Stephen Anderson in handling information like this.
Then he gives another example, John 3:36. This is a translation dispute. It says in the King James, "He that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him." So the New American Standard, representing the modern versions, says, "He who believes in the Son has eternal life, but he who does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him." So one of them says that you're not saved because you don't believe, and the other one says you're not saved because you don't obey. All right.
So here you have a translational issue, and of course for King James onlyists like Anderson, they have their theology, which is not overly textually derived, but then it's forced on anything that doesn't fit. So they're anti-lordship guys. They don't believe in repentance. They don't believe in obedience. Those are good things to do, but they have a very shallow, unbiblical, grossly deficient view of what faith is. They don't believe faith is the gift of God, et cetera, et cetera. So it results in this mess that you see.
Because basically, James White is coming from a Calvinist perspective, where Anderson is coming from the once saved, always saved IFB and new IFB perspective. And so obviously they're going to read these verses differently. But regardless, it is pointed out by James White, so this is part of his translational disputes, that it has "he that believeth not the Son" in the King James, where the NASB has "he who does not obey the Son." And so it's an interesting thing to look at. And so let's just continue on. So we're just going to move through that. Now, we'll just see if Anderson brings up anything more about that
in many of their groups. But here is the issue, and let me add the text, Greek New Testament. Where did Textus Receptus go? Vaticanus. Why isn't this in alphabetical order? I have so many texts that I could throw up here on the thing. There it is. It's under GNT. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think there was a variant. There is no variation here between the texts. The question is the translation of apython. And it's interesting that the word means to obey. It just...
Okay, so I'll just quickly look this up in Spiritus ad Haetes. And so I will go to my J. Green's interlinear, which is falling to pieces. We put all the Greek of this onto my website and the Strong's numbers, which was a huge job. So we're looking at John 3:36. John 3:36, everlasting life, but disbelieving the Son not will see life. Okay, so disbelieving 544. Let's have a quick look. 544. Okay. So Zod Hiates has disobedient, not allow oneself to be persuaded or believe, to disbelieve, to be disobedient. Spoken of disbelievers in Christ, of those who are disobedient to God, those who did disobey, unbelievers, heathen, with the dative. I wonder if it has the dative. Where am I? Oops, I've skipped a few pages. this is, I may as well just rip that section out. It's already fallen right out. Okay, 36. Nope. Synonyms to disbelieve. Okay, so really what I would have to do with that one is go through the usage and look it up in at how the King James translates this in every place. So we're looking at 544. I'll just quickly do that. So I'll go to 544 Greek Bible Hub, I guess, probably is the best one to look at with the Englishman's Concordance. Okay, so NAS has do not obey. King James says he that believeth not. Acts 14:12 says who disbelieved. So remember, this is just the root here. Who disbelieved. King James has unbelieving. Okay. Acts 19:9 and disobedient. And this has believed not. Romans 2:8 and do not obey the truth. Okay, so it says do not obey. So that's interesting. To a disobedient. So it has a disobedient here. Were disobedient, have not believed God. It's interesting. Have been disobedient, not believed. Who were disobedient. King James has them that do not believe. Hebrews 3:18, were disobedient is to them that believe not. Hebrews 11:36, who were disobedient to with them that believed not. 1 Peter 2:8, because they are disobedient becomes being disobedient. 1 Peter 3:1, of them are disobedient is in the King James obey not. 1 Peter 3:20, were disobedient becomes were disobedient. Okay, same. 1 Peter 4:17, who do not obey is be of them that obey not. And so, yeah, there's 14 occurrences there. So obviously each one would have to be studied to get the correct context, and each section would have to be looked at. You know, this one here is a verb, aorist, participle, active, nominative, masculine, plural. So yeah, it does seem like obey and believe seem to have an interesting affinity here, but we can't just make conclusions just by looking at those. But that's where I would start, by going through those and seeing what is similar. Sometimes too, you can just look these words up in Bill Mounts. So you don't really want something that is too influenced by the critical text crew. So Study Light, sometimes they're good. Blue Letter Bible can be interesting. Wiktionary, I often go there and just have a quick look around. Sometimes it will just have a modern rendition. Sometimes it will talk about the old way of saying it and the older definitions. Okay, so in the verb it is to disobey. Okay, so Study Light. Okay, you got Thayers. So I think rather than just me just skipping around these websites, I'm just realizing that I should really just study this out myself. I'll put it on my website and then I'll read through it probably next time. So that's a bit of homework for me to do. So I don't want to just sit here and just bore you guys to tears with me just going through, Strong's numbers, the same Strong's numbers, same root, but not really dealing with the actual word because that'll just take a bit of time. But Alan Stewart says, James White claims to be a Calvinist, but the whole basis is by faith alone. The verse is destroying salvation or damnation around faith. What a maroon. Alan, keep lying yourself. No, I don't want to bring that up again. I was re-listening to that section the other day and I was laughing quite a lot. So yeah, what verse? John 3:36. Terry O'Neill says Romans 2:8. But unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath comes to mind. Okay. And the thing is, these can be just synonymous, and so, but sometimes it just depends on the context, because obviously there's a lexical definition that we're looking at, but then there's a contextual definition that we really need to get into. So Matt Singleton says, Alan Stewart, you are right. The new Calvinist movement left Calvin on the topic of grace. Okay, let's just continue here.
That's its fundamental meaning is, well, apython is the alpha privative, means to disobey, but the root means to obey. And so you have ha pistion, eiston huion, the one believing in the Son, ekai zoe and ionion, has eternal life, hade apython to huio, but the one not obeying the Son shall not see life. So the question is, what you have here is an example where you have someone who creates a theology, and then even though the original text uses a different word, why doesn't it say pistuo? Why doesn't it just say apistuo, the one not believing? And it's a perfectly good word, but that's not what's even in your TR. So why not render it accurately? It's just a matter of rendering. But they can't render it accurately because they think it would be contradictory to a theology they've already derived. So you see, it's not being derived from the text. They've already got it. What the text has to say is what their theology says it has to say.
So regardless if that is true, okay, just say Anderson is reading his own soteriology into that, and saying obey means, it's a works-based salvation sort of thing. So regardless of that, James White is inserting his theology into the text and saying the King James is wrong here, and why can't they translate it properly, sort of thing. So he's saying that the reading's wrong, where I could say, well, perhaps both of them are wrong, and perhaps this is a synonym, but in context, sometimes even just using a synonym can cause people to read into a verse something that they shouldn't be seeing. And so, I guess the more we study this, the more it'll come out. But, and I'm just on the side, I'm just flicking through Ruckman's book. He talks about this issue for like about 15 pages. So I read through maybe 4 or 5 pages. He keeps going and going and going and keeps mentioning like tons of other stuff, but he keeps going back to John chapter 6 verse 37. So it's interesting. So I'm going to have to go through a lot of that. Alan Stewart says, what is he saying about the KJV translators choosing belief in both places? What is he saying about the KJV translators choosing belief in both places? Yeah, well, that's the thing. They did choose the word believing. And so, or do not believe, so the negative. But Yeah, that's a fact.
That's a very dangerous position to be getting into. And unfortunately, it's a temptation for all of us.
Yes, James.
Translation. Now, he is right about this, okay?
I liked playing things where he kept saying he's right about this. There were a number of times in this where he said, well, he's right about this. He's right about this. And that's nice to hear.
He explains that when it comes to translation, there are literal methods and then dynamic equivalence methods.
Now, this is what's different about Anderson from a lot of these other guys, is that he's a translator. Not a biblical translator, though he claims to read those languages as well, but he's a professional, has functioned as a professional German translator. And he says in this that his wife has been a translator as well. I don't know what language, maybe some of my friends might know.
I'm pretty sure his wife's German.
But so he knows you cannot function as a translator without understanding the difference between formal equivalency, dynamic equivalency, form, function, so on and so forth. You just recognize these things. And so this separates him from a lot of the King James only guys who don't know anything about that.
No, they do. Most of the time, they're just saying things wrong by just saying, oh, we want a literal translation, where when you get Young's literal translation, people don't want that because it's so wooden, or like an interlinear type of thing. Oh, it's literal. So it just depends on their level of literalness. So even if you say word for word translation, most people just mean like what would be labeled as formal equivalence. So that means it is word for word until you get to idioms in Hebrew idioms that are in Greek, or an English idiom, God forbid, etc.
They don't know about how translation is done.
And then dynamic equivalence methods. Now, here's where a lot of King James onlyists have been wrong over the years, okay? They know that the new versions are wrong. They know they're bad, but sometimes they don't know exactly why or what's wrong with them. And so sometimes what you'll hear King James only people say is, well, the King James is a word-for-word translation, and it's very literal, whereas the new versions are just these really loose translations, dynamic equivalence. And they act like dynamic equivalence is bad and literal is good. Well,
and they do. I mean, that's.
But most of the time, it depends on how you classify literal or word for word, or because the King James is a word for word translation, but there are idioms in there, so which happens in every language. I would say that the Greek is when it's completely quoting in the New Testament, when it's quoting the Old Testament, there are places where it's quoting verbatim that from the Hebrew, and that's word for word. But even then, there are times when they're carrying across an idiom, and so that's just part of translation. And so it's just the way it is.
He's exactly. Wow, the birds are singing and the bears are sitting with the lambs. And it's because of the piano. The piano is causing us all to be much more loving and stuff.
They're wrong about that because, of course, as Dr. White pointed out here, the King James uses dynamic equivalence in many places, and the modern versions are...
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it dynamic equivalence. I don't think idioms are akin to modern dynamic equivalence that occurs in like the New Living Translation and things like that.
Literal in many places. In fact, many times the modern versions are too literal, and that's sometimes why they sound so stupid. When you listen to the modern versions, he have told thee, oh, human one. They call you human one instead of man. They get so clinical.
That's one time I don't object to his utilization of a funny voice. He hath told thee, oh, human one. Yeah, that's right. There's some bad translations out there. Yeah.
And so literal in their translation that they sound wooden and awkward, and they're bad translations. So the King James is not...
I just had not noticed until now that there's a musical background to this entire thing.
This super literal word-for-word translation that a lot of people believe it is. Now, it obviously is accurate, and it is, correctly translating what's there, I believe it's perfect. It's excellent, but it's not word for word, because a word for word translation is a garbage translation. Okay, if you want a word for word translation, just type a bunch of stuff into Google Translate and look how ugly it comes back at you when it just translates word for word. Okay, now I've actually worked as a translator. My wife has worked as a translator, and when you're doing translation, the way you can tell that it's a good translation is that if someone read the finished product, they wouldn't even know it's a translation. Okay.
I agree. So to all you King James only people that have been attacking me for years for that, go attack Stephen Anderson and go from there.
Well, it's really more so the definition of terms. And so people, most of the time when people say, look, I want a literal translation, I want it verbatim, that type of language, they're not usually saying they want a wooden translate. You basically getting someone who doesn't really know the languages fluently. So if you said to someone who's fluent in both languages, to say it's Greek and English or Greek and French, say for example, if someone knows Greek very well and they know French very well, they will translate it in a way that's verbatim, but they will bring everything across. And yes, there might be, and this is mentioned in James White's book about something like, if you're depressed in Spanish or something, it's like or in French, I think it was, you're eating the cockroach or something like that, which is just an idiom. It's like raining cats and dogs, or it's, well, I say idioms all the time. Our language in Australia, we use lots of idioms that I know when I'm halfway through saying them, like no one's going to understand what I'm talking about. And so sometimes I just have to be careful not to say too many Australian idioms. But people who are Australians, they know what they mean. And if I know another language, I can bring that across into their language. See, the thing is, James White's used to knowing English and pretending that he knows Greek. And so he's bringing things across like this one word means this, this agapeo means I love. And he talks about this in the book, adelphos and phileo and Philadelphia and all this stuff. But if he knew these languages like fluently, he could, like my wife translates on the spot. When I'm in Pakistan, her brother translates everything I say in front of many times people who can speak English. And that's one of the things you're always in the back of your mind. If you've got a translator, sometimes you're like, hey, are these guys bringing everything across? And when I'm there, my wife's like, yeah, everything was brought across. You were saying it in English. He was just repeating it in language. And so sometimes I'll use an illustration. Like, I remember one time I was in a crowd and I said, so how many people here know about Bruce Lee? And one guy out of probably about 1,000 people put his hand up. And I was like, well, I won't use that example then. And so I went on to something else. But so obviously, if I knew their language fluently, I would already know the cultural context and know that they don't know that about Bruce Lee. Hardly anyone knows about it. They don't care about Elvis. They don't care about it. It's just a completely different culture. And so, but if you're fluent in both, you know that. If you're fluent in one, then you like bringing things across woodenly and using dictionaries and all. These guys, my family don't do that. They just straight away that they know what to say, and so to me, most King James guys, when they're saying I want something literal, what they're saying is they want something like the King James, because that is a perfect balance. It is literal, but idioms are brought across in such a way that we understand exactly what's being said.
it says don't add or remove a word. Okay, but obviously when you go from language to language, there are going to be words added and removed, which is why there are words in italics. But you're not removing the substance of anything. You're not removing any meaning. Okay.
And this is where Bryan Ross gets into the issue of verbatim identicality and words being brought across in a sense where, at times there is an idiom, and it needs to be understood that there's a Hebrew idiom. It's like in Matthew or something like that, it's translated into Greek, and that needs to be understood by the translator. So the translator needs to know and needs to be an expert in several languages. And so, especially someone translating the Bible. So someone like Lancelot Andrews, who knew 21 languages, he would easily look at the Greek, spot a Hebrew idiom there, and be able to bring that across into the English language. He could probably do that without even looking anything up. And so, to me, that is someone translating literally and word for word. That's how I determine it. Just because it's been redefined or repackaged, or people say, oh, well, we have formal equivalents or dynamic equivalents, and they've got all these new names. I think we just have a standard way of doing it, and most Reformation Bibles were doing it that way. The King James is a perfect example of something that, for me, is like a word-for-word translation.
Obviously, when you translate into another language, you can't go word for word. If you did, it would be a horrible translation. It would sound horrible, and it would not make sense. Okay, so.
I agree, but that's the whole problem. So many of the arguments that King James onlyists use are based upon ignorance of that very reality, and he repeats those arguments. It just doesn't make any sense. It's like I said, the Steven Anderson of these videos is not the same Steven Anderson we were watching last December with these other guys, doing all the slander, and not the same Steven Anderson we see kicking his pulpit, saying on his pulpit, calling people idiots and kicking him out of his church, and yelling and screaming at the guy he was firing and acting like a complete idiot. It just really makes you wonder which Steven Anderson is the real Steven Anderson, or if there is a real Steven Anderson.
Now, why are we as King James onlyists against textual criticism? Well, the reason why is that we believe in staying with the traditional text that has been passed down.
So Steven Anderson said, why are we against textual criticism? We're not against true biblical textual criticism. We're against the modern method of textual criticism based upon faulty manuscripts as well. So they have a new methodology, but they also have faulty manuscripts, which causes their conclusions to be erroneous. So if you're just going to, have Bill Cosby in one corner and Joe Biden in the other, and you're going to ask questions, you're probably just going to get a bunch of rubbish. But if you have people of truth, people of honesty, and you ask them questions, you're probably going to get truth. And so if you've got manuscripts that are accurate, that are well testified, that are used by the churches, then and Christians have testified that these are the words of God, then you're most likely to get better answers from them than just things that are contradictory to themselves, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, but also that believers over the years have just rejected. I mean, you don't find copies of Sinaiticus. You don't find copies of Vaticanus. You don't find translations based upon these. You see that they are filled with corruption, and so
Now, why are we as King James onlyists against textual criticism? Well, the reason why is that we believe in staying with the traditional text that has been passed down.
So notice he's like, traditional text sort of thing. Well, what he's trying to do here is say, see, even Steven Anderson has a traditional text type of thing. Well, he basically adopts the whole confessional bibliology position. So it's like saying, you know, a Seventh-day Adventist saying, I'm a young earth creationist. I believe that God created the world in 6 days. And, you know, an atheist go, see, these people are Seventh-day Adventists. Deep down, they're just Seventh-day Adventists. It's like, no, just because you come to 1 + 1 = 2, it doesn't mean that you're joined at the hip with someone who comes to that same conclusion. That's ridiculous. But this is the sort of rubbish that James White sort of goes on about. And this is the fallacy that James White, he's basically causing all of us. All it would take is for someone to wear a King James t-shirt and go and do a massacre or something, and we're all to blame. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. Like that grandma who's just reading the Bible on the couch. If she stood up and, you know, did something really stupid and shot someone or, you know, waved a Nazi flag or something, we're all to blame, you know. Where, like I said, I would never, ever do that to him. I would never say, well, all Calvinists are Westboro Baptists, you know, and just show the God hates fags people. But this is what he does. And this is why he's got Anderson. This is why he's talking about Anderson. This is why, you know, in the earlier days, he's talking about Ruckman, because he knows that this type of guilt by association thing works. People get afraid of that and they go, well, I won't get involved with that because it's full of kookiness.
I've heard that somewhere. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not changing the Bible to go with modern discoveries. Okay. So that what the textual criticism does is it digs up something new in the 20th century and then changes the Bible to go with that new discovery. You know, it discovers new manuscripts in the 1800s, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, right? And then it changes our Bible.
Before I forget it, just in case, Erasmus knew about Vaticanus. Erasmus was not opposed to utilizing Vaticanus. He
notice what James White does. He says that they utilize a manuscript. So Erasmus rejected Vaticanus. Okay, he went against the readings of Vaticanus. See, this is what James White says about the apparatus. Or we utilize all the manuscripts, which means that they reject pretty much all of them. And, you know, all the majority texts, all the Byzantine ones, they reject them. But that's utilizing them. You know what I mean? It's just the way he words things so he can turn around and say, hey, we have an embarrassment of riches. Look, we go to all these things at the bottom of NA 28, the apparatus. We can look at all that. We utilize all that information. No, you reject it. You throw it in the bin and you go with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus.
When the controversy over the Com Johanneum came up, he wrote to his friend Bombasius in Rome and asked him to look at Vaticanus. So this idea that, well, it's 1800s, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Stephen Anderson knows that, and you should really give him the benefit of the doubt, because I've heard you say some speakos, but we're, you know, mostly charitable and go, well, he just misspoke there, because you know that in other videos he's brought up the dates of these and talked about Vaticanus and talked about Sinaiticus, but he's most probably talking about Sinaiticus and Papyri and things like that, which is later on in that century and earlier on in the 20th century, because he was saying 20th century, then he was saying, you know, in the 1800s, I'm pretty sure that he said, you got Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. I think in these videos, he's standing in his backyard just talking, you know what I mean? So
just again, these people don't know anything about the history.
See, he gets that one thing. Oh, they don't know anything about like I could dig up material that Anderson has said about Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. I mean, he did a whole movie on like, what was it, New Age Bible versions. And they talk about Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in that movie. And so that's way before this. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that James White's fallen to, just a speako, or you just, you know, you make a typo and he's just all over it saying, look at this guy, he knows nothing. You know, he doesn't think he thinks World War II happened in like 1500. What an idiot, you know. And it's like, come on, like, give people the benefit of the doubt
of the text. They're just this stuff just gets repeated over and over again until it becomes accepted fact.
To match those new discoveries. Well, again, I will never believe that the true Bible was buried under the earth for centuries. Okay, so if it's something that was buried for over 1,000 years, it can't be the true word of God, because we believe that God preserved his word and that people have constantly been copying, preaching, reading, using God's word. And so textual criticism is constantly digging up new scraps of paper and changing the Bible, because they're constantly trying to get the Bible closer to what it actually was written. You know, they're constantly.
And he sort of takes him out of context here, because he's definitely not saying, you know, oh, well, textual criticism is trying, this is all they're trying to do. They're honestly just trying to get to the right readings. He's obviously saying that this is what they're claiming to do, but they're doing a horrible job at it. And if you actually just keep listening, that's pretty much what he says.
Trying to bring the text closer to what the.
Hey, he heard. Think about what this is being said. He's saying we want the received text. We want the traditional text. But textual critics want to get as close to what was written as possible.
Yeah, but you can't get close to what's written when you got your two manuscripts that you're using contradict each other completely. What are you going to do with that? You know, why don't you go with all the weird readings in Sinaiticus? Why don't you just go with Sinaiticus or Vaticanus? Why do you have to mash them together? It's that they do this weird thing. They mash them together, but sometimes they ignore the readings of both because they're so stupid. And they have to go to Byzantine.
Yeah. Some of you in the audience are going, oh, no. Stephen Anderson's on our side? Seems like it.
Apostles actually wrote. We believe that we already have what the apostles actually wrote.
See, in context, he's like, these guys are trying to reconstruct the text, and he's like, see, Anderson thinks like us. And it's like, no, listen to what he's saying. He turns around and goes, we already have what God's written. We already know what God's written. We're not trying to find it. And so
we believe we've had it for the last couple thousand years. So we don't need to go digging it up somewhere. We already have it. Okay, so that's the problem that we have with so-called textual criticism. Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stephen. Unfortunately, the text that you have is the result of textual criticism.
And see, this whole thing just drives me nuts. It's sort of like saying, you know, someone cooking in a speed lab, in a meth lab, it's the same. They're cooking, and so someone cooking in a fine restaurant, they're doing the same thing. It's like, no. Just because you call them cooking doesn't mean it's the same thing. The whole concept is different, and so this is something that on my webpage, if you go to my Textus Receptus site, down here I've written modern textual criticism is focused on a narrowing of the field to a few corrupt and rejected manuscripts, sidestepping the huge amount of Greek and Latin manuscripts and the early church witnesses as unimportant, only to be used when they can be referenced to try and give some support to the Vaticanus primary corruption. It is really an anachronism fallacy, a false definition, to speak of Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza to be doing textual criticism, since their value were in general opposite to those of Griesbach, to Hort, to Metzger, to Wallace confusions. They based themselves on mostly the Greek and Latin manuscripts and the early church witnesses with some faith-consistent logical and grammatical type internal evidence consideration. So that's what the Reformation guys did. Let me just read that section again. They based themselves on mostly the Greek and Latin manuscripts and the early church witnesses. So that's a closed class of witnesses right there. The three in the closed class of witnesses, the Greek, the Latin, and the early church writers, with some faith-consistent logical and grammatical type of internal evidence considerations. This is essentially the opposite of textual criticism as used today, which has a biased presupposition towards Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And also what could be mentioned there is their rules. The shortest reading is the best. The hardest reading is the best. These type of rules are ridiculous. They're stupid. You shouldn't have these type of rules that you go to. But the thing is, they don't always go with the hardest reading. And so you have to have, that's why I called it voodoo. It's art. It's voodoo. It's not a science. That they're just putting in the data in the computer and press enter, and it's like, oh well, the computer spoke and it's AI. It's going to be correct, and they're getting those AI pictures where in the background people have got all these distorted faces. That's their Bible, and they're going, see, it works. And on close examination, you're like, no, this is ridiculous.
Text from any period in the history of the church is the result of textual criticism. Textual criticism was being done by Origen. Textual criticism was being done by Jerome. Textual criticism was being done by Melito of Sardis. Textual criticism has to be done because we're dealing with handwritten manuscripts. We're dealing with multiple languages. We're dealing with...
But your textual criticism is different. And the thing is, it's inconsistent. You've got, people like Griesbach, Wettstein, Ruckman, Tischendorf, Westcott and Hort, all with different methodologies. Then you go to Nessel, who adopts three of these Greek texts and puts them together. Then you've got the Nestle Aland text, where they've got the United Bible Society text, and they've basically gone back to Westcott and Hort. And then they've got Catholics involved with it and all sorts of people, liberals. And now James White is saying you should really get everything you've learned previously, forget all that. We got the CBGM on the scene. That's what he's been saying for years. And so it's different methodology all the way through. Maybe one day they'll crack it, they'll go, wow, we've actually worked it out, but I doubt it. They're just using different methodologies and this, to try and get the answers. If the methodology of Westcott and Hort with their Lucianic recension concepts it's been completely debunked. But they don't go, well, actually, maybe they've gone too far or anything like that. They're like, no, that's fine. They use Unitarians on their text. Oh, that's fine. Don't worry about it. They've used Carlo Martini, Bruce Metzger, Kurt Aland, liberals, heretics. Oh, no, that's fine. It's like they can never do anything wrong. I mean, I wonder if they actually have Hitler on working on the text. Would that be fine too? You know what I mean? How bad does it have to get? Like, I'm expecting people to go, what? Unitarians worked on the text? Oh no, I didn't know that, and run to truth. But they're just like, oh, what's that? Oh, like a Jehovah's Witness. Oh well, that's fine. I still love my Bible. But a lot of people just collapse and they just go, oh well, I might read Bart Ehrman next, and that these guys are causing people to be shipwrecked in their faith.
With translation, that's the factual reality. And so anybody who objects to textual criticism just simply hasn't a clue what they're talking about. They don't. They have no idea.
This is just the dumbest straw man argument I've ever heard. And I don't mind James White saying it because he sort of made it up. Okay. But when people repeat what he's saying and go, like a gotcha moment, you know that Beza had to do textual criticism too. You sort of like, yeah, and like, see, gotcha. And it's like, what on earth are you talking about? It's so strange, It's like saying what Donald Trump is doing today with his election campaign. That's exactly the same as what Caesar did. Caesar did politics. Trump's doing politics. It's exactly the same. And that's the same as what's happening. That's exactly the same as what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution. They did politics, same as Mao in 1950s and 60s. He did politics. Same as Japan when they were bombing Pearl Harbor. They were doing politics. It's like you've got to explain things better than just having a label for everything. A textual criticism will say that these guys are doing textual criticism today, and we'll just get that label and put it on everyone in the past. It's like, no, you can't do that. It's like saying, I don't know, like if you were to explain someone being a good shooter, he's a sharp shooter, he can shoot his gun. Well, there's going to be a difference between a gun like 100 years ago and a gun today. It's a completely different skill. And so, people with muskets and things like that, they had a different skill than people today, like, shooting a machine gun. They're both shooting, but James White's just like, this is one of the silliest things that I ever hear him saying. But like I said, it makes me dry reach, vomit in my mouth and swallow it again when I hear people repeating this stuff. I'm like, and gotcha moments like, hey, did you guys know that Beza did textual criticism? Okay, yeah. And they're like, see, gotcha. It's like, oh no. Like, have your arguments become that low? You know what I mean? Anyway.
None. They just don't know. They could never produce a text on their own because to do so would require textual criticism.
They could never produce a text on their own. We believe that when the technology of manuscripts was turned into the technology of printing, they ironed it out. It took about 100 years. They ironed out the TR editions and the English Bibles, and they worked it out. And so how long have you guys had to work on your text? I mean, and you're not even going from one technology to the next. You're just sitting around tinkering with the text and creating readings that people are like, I'm not sure, but it looks pretty Gnostic to me now. That verse that I really understood and flowed easy, and you could tell that John wrote it, because you can just see, it flows with everything else. But now it seems Gnostic, or now it seems like it doesn't mean what it used to mean. So has Christianity changed, or has the Bible changed? Oh, no doctrines have changed. Shati says, and James White loves Granville Sharp. Yeah. The Granville Sharp rule.
Erasmus did textual criticism. Stephanos did some. Beza did textual criticism. And
Mao did politics. The Bolsheviks did politics. Trump's doing politics. They're all the same. Biden's doing politics. Like even different groups, like the textual criticism of the majority text guys is different to what the critical text guys are doing. And he's just textual criticism. Yeah, just put that label on everyone and apparently you win. I guess I'm just trying to think of another example, but it's so silly I can't. I've done the politics one over and over. What else can we say that is like a label like that? I can't. I honestly can't think of something that is so silly. It's ridiculous.
They didn't have the materials that we have today. There is something good.
So wouldn't that mean that their textual criticism will be different? You know what I mean? They didn't have the same material. So they were doing the same thing. They were doing textual criticism, but they didn't have, like, it's like they were both shooting. You realize they were both shooting guns. There's 200 years between them, but they were all shooters. And it's like they didn't have the same guns, though. It's like, yeah, so it's different. Straight away, he just contradicts himself.
Good and positive in...
See, he's got these two different arguments. So now he's got to say, well, what they had back then was, they didn't have like what we have today. But they were doing the same thing. It's like, how can they be doing the same thing without the same information that he's making out? So these things cross paths, and he's contradicting himself.
Scholarly interaction to sharpen, to detect, especially when only one person is doing the work.
I mean, they're still writing books about Erasmus and his interactions with pretty much every scholar of the day. All the humanists, linguists, heads of state, talking to all these people, and on the fine points of textual criticism of language, and that's just Erasmus. That's the beginning. That's the bottom. And then you build up from there, and it's like, Stephanus and Beza and King James guys are just legendary. But
it's always better to have a committee, because a committee will round out the corners.
I think it is always better to have a committee. But I think one of the reasons why these guys make this accusation is because they actually know that to have a type of committee, usually the people who are able to do that type of thing are usually like the Bible societies. So if you wanted to do a translation into, say, any language like Swahili, and you just got one guy to do it, these guys will probably reject that, because usually it's like one guy who knows, he's dedicated to it, and he'll give himself to it and fund it and all the rest of it. And then it's only one guy, but that's probably 100 times better than the 50 guys they get for the United Bible Societies are all compromised, and half of them aren't even saved. And I mean, what would you rather, one Tyndale to do a Bible, or 20 Westcott and Hort, George Van Smith, Carlo Martini, Bruce Metzgers?
There will be prejudices that anyone has that a committee will help to filter out. So we have advantages.
But you can have a whole group who is prejudiced. You can have a whole group of people who will translate things in a certain way, because they're all in consensus. That they're all reading from the same corrupt documents, and they're taught in the same corrupt schools.
As far as the numbers and availability of manuscripts today. And we also have the growth of understanding that derives from scholarly study and interaction. But every text that exists is the result of textual critical study and material. That's just all there is to it. You can't get away from it no matter how hard you try. All right.
Who's getting away from it? Modern text criticism is different. Critical text people who are in the academy will tell you it's different. That's why I can't understand why he just keeps using this label. They did textual criticism. It's like, what on earth are you trying to say? He's just throwing this argument out there like, we win. We win because you guys do textual criticism too. It's like, yeah, but even Jan Kranz, Peter Gurry, is it Peter Mead? I get his name wrong sometimes. Elijah Hixson. These guys will say that, yeah, we do it differently. So why do you just label it textual criticism? It's the same thing. Why are you doing that? Why? Why?
I don't have a lot left, but I don't want to rush it. So I'm going to save I'm going to put a little mark there to save where we are so that I can come back to this and we can continue the response. This is as far as I've listened. Now I've got to throw, like the next 3 chapters on the iPod and suffer through them. But we'll get it done. Now, onward and upward to...
I think YouTube do this on purpose. Look,
real
I'm
quick.
trying to click
No,
it. I was trying to click it, and it went to one of these symbols and went back. And then I tried to click it again, and it went to somewhere else. And it's like, it's like one of those click things that pop up, pages come up. It's like, it happens all the time. Anyway, so I think that's enough for this video. We've gone for 3 hours. Now, we are going to continue going through chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 goes for like 40 or 50 pages. So it's not like, oh, well, we just did chapter 3 in one session. We've only really gone up to like a couple of the arguments. We're probably about 3 or 4 pages into that. So, but we'll just keep going through, and I'll examine this one, especially John chapter 6, verse 47, and I'll start to build a case. And perhaps when we get to that issue, it says in chapter 7 that he discusses that. Actually, I might even go there. Chapter 6. Maybe I'll look it up in the index. John 6:47, 2:18. Okay, so we have, so the same thing. And okay, it's got what D.A. Waite says about it. That's interesting, because I actually read what D.A. Waite said about it, and he's got it written here. So I didn't really mean that, but so he's got a few pages on that, so that's good. But that's quite a few pages in. But I don't want to rush going through this. We want to go over everything, and then in the end, we'll be able to make a list of arguments and claims, and we'll be able to say, well, James White claims this and claims that. Is this true? Is this false? Or is it just neutral information? And we'll be able to go through each thing and mark it up that way. But apart from that, I think we are done. Now, I did keep my other videos open so I can check them. Where are we? I've got lots and lots of things open here. I'll shut some of these down. Shut James White down. Okay, so here we go. So just a reminder, so we've got a live Q&A in 11 days. So it's going to be Mike Ferrando, myself, and Mike Holner. So this is a live Q&A. So bring your questions about the Textus Receptus, about 1 John 5:7, Old Latin, Church Fathers, Revelation 16:5, whatever you guys want to talk about. This is on Write the Vision Ministry website, YouTube channel. So that's happening in 11 days. And then in 18 days, we have a debate lined up. So this is TurretinFan. He's going to be debating Peter Van Cleek. So Peter Van Cleek, he debated James White. So TurretinFan is a friend of James White. So this is going to be interesting. And the question is, has God preserved the Greek New Testament in a single printed edition? So this is on Saturday, July 13th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's New York City time. And so that is in 18 days. So that should be very interesting to look at. So anyway, guys, I'm losing my voice here and I've got to go to bed. It's past midnight and I've got to be up early. So God bless you and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us.